Away go. Okay, so it's been a little while since we've done a live stream. I'm just going to move my phone out the way. Yeah, it's been a little while. A lot has happened over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we've had the NBA betting scandal, which has now led to federal indictments. We've also got the Major League Baseball betting scandal which is also linked to the NBA one, which has also led to indictments. We now know that Ortiz and Clase, the Cleveland Guardians players, have now been indicted federally over the last 24 hours. They've now been served with court papers and they've been charged. And this all stems back to an individual Toronto Raptors two-way player who was caught in 2023, who copped a plea deal, obviously took a lifetime ban. I've actually forget his name, but it's now obviously spread further in the NBA and now Major League Baseball. And this does raise a lot of questions about the relationship between the leagues, the broadcasters, the individual teams, and the betting companies. Which, the pros and cons of obviously increased revenue for the leagues at a time when obviously the economy isn't doing particularly great, but the betting companies are doing reasonably well. And there's a lot of questions over what's going on. We've also obviously had the Rugby League Ashes, which is finished in a 3-0 series whitewash to the Australians, which many people predicted, ironically, before the series kicked off 3 weeks ago, that it would be a 3-0 series win to Australia. And that has I have, and that has obviously proven to be the case, that Australia would win the series and win the series comfortably. They've done that. There's questions now over the future of Sean Wayne as the England coach, obviously with the World Cup this time next year in Australia and on PNG. And, a lot of questions over the performance of some of the players selected, how England's attack was really, quite honestly, only 2 tries scored in 3 tests is really disappointing. And the fact that in back-to-back games, they failed to score in the second half in tests 2 and 3. And in the first game, they failed to score in the first half. So they were kept scoreless half the time, which is deeply concerning as well. Playing players out of position, certain players not selected. There's a lot of questions over there's been fallout already, and we'll see who is the coach for next year's World Cup. Same with Kevin Walters in Australia. Obviously he's put his hand up saying he would like to coach the team for next year's World Cup, but there are those saying that it wasn't a particularly strong Australian team. It wasn't the strongest team that Kevin Walters could have selected if all players were available. And he wasn't playing the strongest England side, because what is interesting is since 2017, when the teams actually last met, the gap has widened considerably. In the 2 test matches in the 2017 World Cup that England and Australia faced each other, the grand total of points for and against, I think one game there was a 2-point differential and another game there was a 6-point differential. So it was like 12-4 aggregate score during those 2 tests. And then you look at the 3 tests we've just had, the closest was 14-4. So there are some deep worrying trends here that the gap between Australia and England has widened significantly. And as I say, this Australian side that played in the Ashes is not on the same level of quality of the Australian side that played in the 2017 World Cup. I would argue that team would wipe the floor with this team. And you could argue that New Zealand are a lot stronger than what they were in 2017. And you could argue that the Pacific Island nations are a lot stronger than what they were in 2017. Obviously, Samoa beat England in the last World Cup in the semi-final after losing in the opening game quite heavily. I wouldn't say Liverpool are in the worst crisis in the world. I think there's a lot of. I think the league is highly competitive this season. I would say highly competitive, but I wouldn't say Liverpool are in the worst crisis. But they're finding their title defence exceptionally difficult. But Man City, I mean, look, Man City last year, people were saying the same thing, that it's a crisis, and they still managed to finish top four. So we will see what happens. It's a long season. We've obviously got the FA Cup to play yet, where Liverpool probably have a very good chance, and the Champions League. They're still in the Champions League. It's still the group stages or the league stage of the Champions League, and that they come off the back of obviously the 1-0 win against Real Madrid. Yeah, the form isn't great right now, and there's a lot of clubs you could say the form is not great right now. But Arne Slot is finding second season syndrome. It happens with quite a lot of clubs that have a really successful season, and then they find it's harder to replicate the same success they had the season before. Now, yes, you could argue there's been a lot of squad changes, and he has signed a lot of players, and that I think has disrupted the dressing room somewhat. You're adding some big name players who've played well at other clubs, fitted other club systems which are different, and they've been added to a different system, and it's upset the balance of things. There has been some player turnover at Liverpool in the last couple of seasons, and then you've added these big egos to the squad, and that's going to cause. It's going to take some time, but look, it's November now, and Ishak is still struggling. Wirtz is still struggling, and that's got to be a concern. That it's these players aren't picking up where last season they were playing really well. And in Wirtz's case, he played very well for Leverkusen over several seasons, and that's got to be a bit of a concern. But at the same time, the systems that are employed by Liverpool are different to the systems that Newcastle and Bayer Leverkusen were implementing with those players. But it is a lot of money that Liverpool have spent in the summer on these players. And the Isak situation, Alexander Isak, where he refused to train or play for Newcastle. You've got to bear that in mind. And you could argue some of the his teammates, new teammates of Liverpool, probably took a dim view of that. Like Van Dijk and Andy Robinson, for example, senior players, they might have taken a bit of a dim view of him refusing to train or play, which meant his fitness is probably not at the same level it should be compared to the rest of the squad. And then you look at his performances for Sweden in the qualifiers; they weren't particularly great. But the whole Swedish side wasn't playing particularly well the last two international breaks. We're going into another international break. It'll be interesting to see if Isak, picks up his form. Be interesting to see. But there's several sides that I think there's a lot of sides that I think are massively underperforming. In this first quarter of the season, and there are some other sides that are really struggling, and some teams that I think are overperforming. But there will be a market correction. There will be some kind of correction at some point. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. Oh, do love me a bit of Doctor. But I wouldn't. I think I wouldn't call it a huge crisis. I'll call it a bit of confidence issue, and I would say that, considering where they were last year and how they played in the league last year, that yes, you could argue that the performances are not on the same level of last year. But then you could argue last year Arsenal were in a very strong position and then they fell away. But Arsenal are doing quite well so far this season. Yeah, Monster. I mean, thinking about it, there's only a couple of flavours that I drink at the moment. This is actually quite hard to find these days. It's one of the older flavours. It's quite hard to find, but they've now got a sugar-free version, which seems to be popping up everywhere. I can't drink the original flavour anymore. Even the sugar-free one, it just never tasted nice to me to begin with. I was never a fan of Monster originally, and then I stumbled across these originally in 2015, 2016, and yeah, I've enjoyed them ever since. But they have gone up in price significantly. So when I remember when Monsters used to be about £1, they're 75p more expensive now than what they were a decade ago, which tells you all you need to know. They've doubled in flavour almost in a decade. So, but yes, I've got plenty of these in the fridge. I find it interesting though that Monster, unlike Red Bull, have never gone into the team sports like football, whereas Red Bull have, and obviously we can debate the pros and cons of Red Bull's football club and sports team ownership strategy. We can debate that. It does. I do find it very interesting that Monster, one of their biggest rivals in the energy drink, soft drink kind of world, have never gone down the route of we're going to buy a sports team or we're going to be the main sponsor of a sports team outside of motorsport. I find that, or extreme sports, I find that really, really interesting. Well, they do sponsor individual athletes and several motorsport teams. They don't seem to have wanted, for whatever reason, to go into team ownership of sports teams in regard outside of motorsport. I find that really interesting that they've decided not to do that. Which I find interesting and indifferent. It's obviously in their sponsorship and marketing kind of strategy, they focus more on the motorsports and extreme sports, whereas Red Bull, while they also focus on the extreme sports and the motorsport, they've also got into team sport ownership. And of course, most recently, they bought the Newcastle Falcons and rebranded them. And you can argue the pros and cons of that. Obviously, they were heavily involved in football and ice hockey. And I just find it interesting that Monster haven't decided to go down the same path. That's an interesting one. Just saying. I just find that interesting that Monster haven't decided to go down the same path as Red Bull when it comes to sports ownership. Now, start the live stream discussions going on in the NBA and Major League Baseball. Obviously, that discussion around the betting companies and sponsorship and advertising comes up quite regularly, and obviously what we're seeing in North America is quite worrying. Obviously, it started in the NBA with a minor Toronto Raptors two-way player. It's now spread to the US, Major League Baseball. It's all linked in the same indictment out of New York, and it does raise questions about what's going on. And I do think more players and more individuals across the major leagues in North America, I think, will eventually be implicated in this ongoing organised crime/gambling scandal. I think that is very much the case, and it does raise questions. I mean, look, the betting companies obviously realised something was up. They do have their algorithms that pick suspicious betting patterns up, and that's obviously the case, that they've realised there are some odd betting patterns. And from what we know from the Major League Baseball situation, these two players were under investigation earlier this season. I think the timing of the release of the indictments yesterday is very, very important. Obviously, the World Series took place a week before, and I think the timing of it is no coincidence that they've waited until post-season and post the World Series for the FBI and the District Court in New York to hand out these indictments and these charges. Initially, obviously, they were suspended for the month of August, and that dragged on, and there was no news. And very similar to the NBA situation, where players have been under investigation for some time. It's worrying. I think there's going to be more indictments. I think more individuals within the major leagues are going to be implicated. This does put pressure on Rob Manfred and Adam Silver, the two Major League commissioners with the NBA and Major League Baseball. And Adam Silver, for example, as a Major League commissioner, is rarely, he rarely makes the headlines. He's the Major League commissioner most under the radar. I did my Major League commissioners video before all this blew up earlier this year, and there isn't a lot of controversy with Adam Silver, but he's now under a lot of pressure, a lot more pressure and scrutiny than I think he's ever been under as NBA commissioner. Rob Manfred obviously is a very hated, very disliked commissioner of Major League Baseball, and he's on the way out anyway. He's said he's going to stand down soon, but this does put a lot of pressure on Adam Silver at the NBA and Rob Manfred at Major League Baseball. And Roger Goodell and Gary Bettman, for example, obviously will be keeping an eye on the situation, because there's always the potential that NFL and NHL players and coaches and general managers and executives could also be caught up at some point in this scandal, which I think could potentially have, more to come. I think more individuals are going to obviously be implicated. It's clear that obviously deals have been struck and more names have been dropped into the pipeline. But from what we can gather, some of these investigations go back years, that the FBI and the district attorneys and regional law enforcement have been involved. I mean, some of these investigations, have been going on for some time. The timing of the indictments is very, very interesting. Right at the start of the NBA season and right after the end of the World Series, the timings are very, very interesting. And there's no coincidence with those timings. And we'll obviously have to wait and see what happens in a court of law. This process is going to be very, very long-winded, but I can't see, Clase and Ortiz, for example. I can't see them playing Major League Baseball ever again. And in regards to the NBA situation, I think more names are going to come out, more allegations are going to be made. And there's a lot of conspiracy theorists, talking about Michael Jordan's career, how his career ended, and speculation that the NBA knew about some of the gambling that he got up to, because it's very well known that he's a big gambler, and that there was the potential for illegal gambling going on with Michael Jordan outside of, let's say, Vegas and the state of Nevada, where he's obviously known to go to Vegas and Reno and Atlantic City. But there are allegations swirling around that haven't been disproven, may I add, that Michael Jordan was suspended by the NBA or allowed to retire to play baseball, to cover up the fact that if they didn't, he was going to be found out for gambling in some way, and there was a cover-up. Now, this is all alleged, and it's circumstantial evidence, and there's a conspiracy theory, but he's never denied that he hasn't gambled, and it's well known that he's, some of the Vegas stories that get told about Michael Jordan are well known and well documented. The fact that these allegations and conspiracy theories have been swirling around for many, many years have now regained traction is, there's no smoke without fire. And some of the people he was associated with were caught up in other gambling like stings that the FBI launched, like Operation Slapshot 2006. Was a big thing, and it implicated the NHL. Now, all those years ago, that's what went quiet. But then the NBA with Donaghy, the referee, and what came out about that and allegations made there, there's no smoke without fire. And now we hear of ex-players giving interviews and discussing things on podcasts about alleged referee interference in games, and certain allegations that matches were manipulated and results were manipulated. I think And let me put it to you this way. Let me put it this way. I think what the reputational damage that the NBA is going to be facing right now, going forward, is going to be huge. The fact that LeBron James's name has been dragged into it, and the fact that Michael Jordan's team that he owns has been implicated and named in the indictments. I think it's the Memphis Grizzlies that he owns, or Charlotte Hornets. I mean, that in itself, he has been involved in ownership of the Charlotte Hornets, I believe. That in itself is deeply concerning. And the fact that head coaches are involved in this. And then you've got the illegal poker games where they were nicking money off people, which in itself is just ridiculous. But these are these are people who've earned millions and millions and millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in salary now over their careers, players and coaches. You know, you've got a Hall of Famer who's now, and a head coach of an NBA team indicted by the FBI and the district attorney in New York. This is deeply concerning, and I don't think. But this, I've been saying this for a long time, that the major leagues in North America, while they've obviously got a working relationship with the betting companies, and there are checks and balances in place to red flag certain things, I don't think they were actually. I think they were naive, and I don't think they were fully prepared for the potential of scandal like this. And now we've got potential spot and match fixing. And individual players taking spot fixes and giving over confidential team information to gamblers to say certain players are playing, certain players aren't playing, and so is injured, and so is out of the lineup for personal reasons, so he's not playing tonight, is deeply concerning. And then there's a lot of other misinformation now on the internet about all the major leagues. And I am surprised that the NFL hasn't been dragged into this. I am actually a little bit surprised that the NHL hasn't been dragged into this. But I've been saying for a long time that the major leagues are woefully underprepared in America, and the fans as well, and the leagues, and the teams. I think while they have the discussion about don't gamble on certain things, I think the fact that this has come out now, the fact that in other parts around the world, like here in the UK, for example, there's pushback against team sponsorship from gambling companies and gambling ads on TV during live broadcasts, and we are starting to see that pushback a little bit, and legislation coming in where the only sports that won't be impacted, I think, are going to be horse racing and the dog racing. But every other major sport has got to limit the amount of sponsorship and limit the amount of adverts during live broadcasts from gambling companies. We've seen in snooker. Players get banned for match fixing, taking bribes to throw games for betting. We've seen in tennis allegations about, players again being paid money to throw a game for gambling. And so it's not just the team sports, and it is deeply concerning. And we've seen allegations over here in Europe with players spot fixing and match fixing in a lot of sports, and this goes back years. And in some countries, some sports leagues are struggling to draw fans now because the actual true fans don't believe what they're seeing is a fair contest. They believe it's rigged. And now we find out in Turkey, at least half the referees have got gambling accounts and have been suspended by the Turkish FA. It's deeply, deeply worrying. And the fact that we have organised crime figures involved in the indictments is quite troubling as well. Now, some of the money that these players, when they're fixing games, are actually getting paid is peanuts to their actual salaries. So it does make you wonder why they have decided to do what they've done. And in Ortiz and Clase's situation, um, the allegations, I can't remember if it's Ortiz or Clase. I think it's Clase who's the big name player. He was doing what he was doing for years, apparently, and he got his teammate involved because they're both from the Dominican Republic. But it, it's very, very troubling that, you know, and this was warned about some time ago. We've seen some individual players breach betting rules and take suspensions, but now we're seeing federal indictments, and that's got to be concerning, and does raise a lot of questions, about things, and I don't know where the NBA goes from here, and I don't know where Major League Baseball goes from here. They're the two most impacted leagues at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if players and officials and coaches in other leagues, or the other major leagues, are also potentially implicated at some point, and more names come out the hat, and then the scandal then grows, and more questions get raised. But I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on, and it is concerning. But we'll see if any more names, any more players and coaches get implicated, any more team officials get implicated, and we will see what happens going forward. But the warning signs were there some time ago, and and I wouldn't be surprised if the players that have been caught, the coaches that have been caught, do give plea deals and they give up more names, and then the scandal grows. And then what does that mean for Adam Silver as the NBA commissioner? What does that mean for Rob Manfred, the Major League Baseball? Even though Rob Manfred is standing down soon and stepping aside, I think Adam Silver as NBA commissioner is under a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. He's the public face of the league. He's the public face of the league administration, and this has happened on his watch. So someone's going to have to be the fall guy. There's some, and pressure's now on Adam Silver and how the NBA responds, and what happens going forward in regards to team sponsorships and the league's relationship with the betting companies and the broadcasters' relationship with the betting companies as well. It's not a good look. Not a good look for the league. Now, moving on to different sport, obviously, we were talking about the Rugby League Ashes and how it was 3-0 whitewash, and there's question marks on whether Sean Wayne should remain England coach and whether Kevin Walters will get an extension as the Australia coach. But obviously, the Eli Katoa situation. I've done a video on the Eli Katoa situation. I've discussed the Eli Katoa situation with obviously the injury, the head injury he suffered, or head injuries, because he got knocked out 3 times, once in warm-up and twice actually in the game for Tonga against New Zealand last week. Obviously, he had a bleed on the brain, required emergency surgery, which is actually life-saving surgery. So he was very, very lucky. He was very, very lucky that he is recovering in hospital. And it does raise questions over the Tongan coaching setup, because this is not the first time they've been criticised for player welfare. Obviously, last year, Jason Taumalolo went back to the North Queensland Cowboys with a broken foot, which wasn't disclosed to the team. They weren't happy, and he missed a large chunk of this season because of that foot ankle injury that wasn't disclosed to them. Obviously, he picked up that injury in the final test for Tonga last year, and now Eli Katoa. I'm highly doubtful that Eli Katoa ever plays in the NRL again. I think most likely that is his career done, and he's a very talented player, very skillful player, very versatile back row forward who can also play in the centres as an emergency if need be. Great skill set, good defensive player, obviously very talented player. But I think it's highly unlikely that he plays ever again. but questions do need to be asked, not only of the Tongan coaching setup, but also of the independent match day concussion spotters and doctors, and the whole system around what happens if it is an injury in warm-up, and the player welfare, and were all the protocols followed fully, because that warm-up collision, I mean, that was a sickening collision. And then if you actually watch the game, you can see he's not right from the very first whistle until his second head knock when he leaves the field. It was clear and obvious that he wasn't right on the bench. And in my opinion, I think he should have been in the dressing room at that point, not on the sideline. And if anything, should have been on his way to hospital immediately. But having now watched the match in full, you can clearly see he's very unwell during the game. And if you follow the NRL and you follow the Melbourne Storm and you watch him week in, week out, that wasn't an Eli Katoa performance. It was clear and obvious he shouldn't have been playing. And Christian Wolf and his coaching staff and his physio staff and the team doctor or doctors, they face a lot of questions. And I don't think this is the end of the story. And I am surprised that the RLPA haven't actually got involved, because this is a player welfare issue. And, you know, I am surprised by the silence from the RLPA following the incident. I am a bit surprised there, because I would think that is his career done. It all depends, obviously, on his recovery, but I'll be highly surprised if he ever plays again, with the risk and then the health risk attached with that, because if he's had brain surgery. I would be highly surprised if he ever takes the field again in a playing capacity. So that is a situation that, while he's in hospital recovering, that is going to have to be kept an eye on. From all reports, he is recovering well, but there are a lot of questions now over, what happens in training and warm up, and how international and club teams actually deal with that kind of incident outside of game time, because that was a very serious injury he suffered in warm up, and yet the team doctors and the physio, and there is no doubt. In the Eli Katoa situation, that's very difficult, because it didn't actually happen in the game. If that happens actually after the first whistle, that'll be the independent spotters and doctor. Now, I'm very, very surprised that they don't check a warm up, but at the same time, I don't know if that's within the independent concussion spotters and independent match day doctors protocol. But at the same time, injuries can happen in warm up. You can have like an twisted ankle. You could slip and do your knee, pull up, do your hammy. So to me, in my personal opinion, the head coach, Christian Wolf, would have known. To me, Christian Wolf would have had to have known that there has been a potential injury or an injury in the warm-up. He would have known. Absolutely. And this is not the first time that Tonga, with the coaching staff, have been criticised where players get injured all the time. It happens. But Tamalolo last year with the broken foot. Now, I believe Tamalolo tried to play on with that broken foot. And obviously, they didn't realise it was broken at the time. But obviously, he's gone for scans. The Tongan medical staff and the coaching staff know he's broken his foot, but didn't disclose that to his club. So he returns to his club with a broken foot. They're expecting him to run it, a week off, go into pre-season, and goes, I can't. I've got broken bones in my foot. And so this is not the first time that questions have been asked about the player welfare and an injury reporting with the Tongan setup. Now, I believe Christian Wolf's coaching staff are also the same staff that he has at the Dolphins. So there's a lot of questions there. The final say, the doctors and the physio should have gone, look, he's had a head knock, can't play. And there were teammates around who saw that collision. You can go, look, he's not good. And they are told now that you see how players respond in game when a player has a head knock. They go over, they make sure the player's okay, put him in the recovery position. They know the signs to look for as teammates and as opponents. If there's a head clash or a player's injured, knocked out, whatever. I would have thought so. I wouldn't expect any major rule changes, but I would expect better protocols. And the protocols, if something like that happens in game or in a warm up, that those protocols are followed more strictly. I wouldn't be surprised if the NRL says that if something like that happens in warm up, that the concussion centres and the independent doctor have a say as well. But I think heads are going to roll here. I think heads will roll. I have no doubt on that. Because there's a lot of questions that need answering. And as a fan and as someone who's played rugby union in the amateur levels in the league system, and as someone who's got friends who play ice hockey, rugby union, and other contact team sports, and I've got friends involved in boxing and MMA and kickboxing and the martial arts. The same thing occurs in boxing or in mixed martial arts or the various individual like taekwondo, kickboxing, Muay Thai, any contact sport, be it team or individual. If you have a concussion either in a fight or in a game or in training, you are stood down. You are stood down from playing. Now, it depends on each sport, but there's a mandatory stand-down period where you have to go through protocols. Now, at the moment, the NRL says it's a minimum 11 days. Minimum 11 days. I think that's across rugby league now. It's a minimum 11-day mandatory stand-down period if you are deemed to have failed a head injury assessment. Now, Will Warbrick is the prime example of a player who only played 5 games this season because he got concussed early on in the season. He had a concussion in a game and he did not meet the concussion protocols. He missed the majority of the season because he didn't meet the concussion protocols. And that was with the Melbourne Storm. He's Eli Katoa's teammate at the Melbourne Storm. And he did not meet concussion protocols. So he had his 11 days. In that 11 days, at no point did he meet the protocols to say you are safe to return to training, let alone play. And then following that, he still had issues and was kept out of the lineup. Now, I'm a massive NHL fan, and we see this quite regularly where a player, I forget which player it was last season, missed like 6 months of the season because of concussion. His team stood him down, and then towards the end of the season, he returned to training, non-contact, then contact, and then full training before he got back in the lineup. And then the team was outside the playoffs, and they were like, "There's no point. You might as well just we'll end your season now." And so there are protocols in place. I mean, if you get knocked out in a boxing fight, you're out for 3 months, I believe. No training, minimum. I think there's protocols in place. The Victor Radley thing. Now Victor Radley. He's obviously got his 10-week suspension now. Whether that's for next season or he's got to go unpaid during pre-season, we shall see. But obviously, he didn't get selected for England. He ruled himself out of selection. But Victor Radley, he did not meet passing concussion protocols. We saw it with Boyd Cordner before he retired and Jake Friend. They had lengthy stand-down periods, and then ultimately they did retire because of concussion, but they did not meet. They did not pass protocols, and they said, "No, you're not playing." There's been a few other players as well, but there's been a multitude of NHL players who've been out for concussion. I think it was a goaltender who got knocked out. Forget which team, but he missed most of the season. He was stood down, not allowed to play, did not pass protocols, so did not show enough. He was still showing some symptoms. They were like, "No, you're not playing. You're not training. You're not." But 10, 15 years ago, he would have been training. He would have been playing. And obviously, the safety aspect has massively improved over the last 2 decades. The protocols have massively changed over the last 2 decades. But it's like any workplace injury. you are entitled to recovery, and that you are entitled to, financial support. And so this is where, and potentially you can get entitled to massive payouts. And this is where professional sport is different in regards to the world of employment. And we're now seeing funds being set aside for former players to access if they have to retire because of injury, or post-retirement if they have health issues that they can access. And we've seen that highlighted in recent years. Now, the Victor Radley situation, obviously we know he was, I believe, him and Brandon Smith, I believe on that golf trip, Brandon Smith was recovering from his knee injury. And Victor Radley, I don't know if they had a bye week, but I don't know if Victor Radley at that point was out injured or was actually fit and playing. But it's very interesting that Victor Radley's come out and said, yeah, no, I'm going to stand down from the England squad. I'm not going to go. I'm going to take myself away from selection. I'm going to cop my internal club suspension, because the NRL didn't suspend him. The club did. That's really interesting. The club said, no, we are going to fine you and suspend you, and the NRL did not get involved. Now, in regards to Brandon Smith, it's gone very, very quiet on the Brandon Smith front. One thing's really interesting, though. He's not appeared on the James Graham Buy Round podcast. I find that really interesting that he hasn't appeared on the Buy Round podcast with James Graham. And he's disappeared from that, but they're not making any. Yes, Tamari Martin did have a brain bleed, and he was forced to retire. But then after so long, he did seek medical advice, and he has obviously unretired and come back. But I think with the Eli Katoa situation, those 3 serious head knocks in the space of an hour, I think the circumstances behind Tamari Martin and his time out of the game were different. But in Eli Katoa's case, I mean, Tamari Martin is the exception rather than the rule. We have to go. I think we have to go with that assumption that Tamari Martin is exceptional, and it's not normal that any athlete who's involved in a contact sport, when they have that kind of bleed on the brain, that would be a career done. The fact Tamari Martin has managed to come back and has been passed medically fit to do so, and has satisfied more than one doctor, I would have thought. More than one doctor, I would have thought he would have satisfied several neurosurgeons and other physicians for them to be satisfied that he's A-OK to do that. Is very. I can't think of. I think he's the only player I can think of, or athlete I can think of, who has satisfied doctors for them to be reinstated into a contact sport. Because if you've got a bleed on the brain and you play a collision, a contact sport, a team or individual contact sport, that's you done. The medical risk is too high, and the risk of further injury and or death is significantly increased. And there is a welfare aspect. So the fact that he convinced or was deemed, because he did seek medical advice, this wasn't him going, I'm going to come back and play. He had to be insured, to get player insurance, which is basically work insurance because of the job they do. In order to be able to get insurance, he had to be medically. It's the same if you drive and you have a health condition, which means you can't drive. They take your license away, not because you've been banned from driving for dangerous driving or speeding or drink driving. It's you've been medically told you've got to stop, and you can have your license taken away. And you do have to go through multiple. Same with epileptics. You can have a driving license as long as you've been epileptic seizure free for 12 months. And if you have a seizure, you can't drive for 12 months minimum, and then you have to prove after 12 months that you are physically safe to drive. There are other conditions as well that you can be barred from driving on a safety aspect, on a health aspect. If you're on certain medications, you have to surrender your life. If you can be medically told to surrender your license, it's the same. You can be medically retired from professional sport because A, they can't insure you, and B, it's your own welfare, it's your own health. So Tamari Martin for me is an exception rather than the rule, and obviously when he made his comeback, a lot of people were surprised that the NRL allowed him back. But obviously, with the insurance side of it, he would have had to go through multiple doctors, not just one, but multiple doctors would have had to pass him fit to get that secondary opinion. I don't think Eddie Katoa is going to be that lucky. Not with the type of surgery he's had to undergo. I would find it very, very difficult. I would be stunned if he plays again. Just because the heightened risk of further injury. And we don't know if he's actually suffered any brain damage, for example, any cognitive, because he's still recovering in hospital, and then there could be complications. And even if he recovers well from the surgery, that there could actually be potential balance, sight, hearing, personality changes, any number of complications from the initial head injury, let alone the surgery. So that those are things that have to be considered and they have to be monitored. The recovery time frame varies from individual to individual. It's basically like he has just survived a very serious car accident, or he's been involved in a train crash or something, and it's a very serious head trauma. That's basically what it's equivalated to. So, and I'm not a medical expert, but I've had a couple of friends and a relative go through a very similar operation. And several friends and a relative of mine have had very serious head injuries and bleeds on the brain and skull fractures and a various number of other things. And one of them now has no sense of smell or taste. Another one has had, and the other two have had very serious personality changes, and one of them is now legally disabled. And so, while they all survived, they've had various levels of injury. One just has no sense of taste or smell. One's had did have a bad bleed, and thankfully he didn't require as invasive surgery. But there are some personality changes. He's a little bit more unpredictable, especially when he drinks, very unpredictable. And the other is now blind in one eye, lack of balance, loud noises cause problems, bright lights cause problems, disorientation, violent mood swings, memory loss, a whole variety of issues. And as I say, they all were on different levels of head injury. One wasn't knocked out. One was in a coma for, was it 6 days or 6 weeks? And the other one was knocked out for a good couple of minutes and was technically dead for 15 seconds. So the wide spectrum of head injuries, and all of them actually involved the pub. So let that sink in. But no, jokes aside, and I do joke with my friends and my uncle, but jokes aside, 3 different but similar head injuries and 3 different outcomes. Now, all 3 required hospital stays and observation, and the recovery time as well. Now, 2 of them have recovered really well. One runs his own business. One's, I think, now a fully certified forklift driver. But one of them is now legally disabled and has had other related health issues. So, and had to give up work and a whole variety of other things. And so the outcomes vary. So that's my personal experience of having to deal with brain injuries, and as someone who's had concussions as well, which aren't particularly pleasant. you know, the recovery from a concussion, I mean, you can have symptoms for years. And it's not being knocked out and concussed is not a pleasant feeling when your legs turn to jelly and you feel sick drunk but not joyful bubbly drunk. When like you're jolly and you're a bit tipsy. It's you want to you've had to, but it's horrible when you can't even stand up. It's not just boxers. We've seen it in the NFL. Obviously, there was that player, I forget his name, who committed suicide last week. And Antonio Brown. There you go. There's a prime example of clear. He's gonna attempted murder, but Antonio Brown. I mean, there is if any example was needed of somewhat a walking CTE, it's Antonio Brown. Aaron Hernandez, we know what obviously happened to him and what he did as being technically classed as a serial killer. But when it came to autopsy they did, it was the worst case of CTE ever seen. Paul Green, the NRL coach, he was a former player. That was the worst case of CTE that this particular doctor had ever seen. When they did the post-mortem and the autopsy, it was the worst case he had seen in at least a former AFL or NRL player. But he declined very, very quickly. Now he was in his 50s. Aaron Hernandez was still in his 20s when he took his own life. And Paul Green as well. So it's not just boxers. Now, Muhammad Ali is obviously the famous example, but George Foreman was asked why are all his sons called George? So I don't have to remember more than one name. George Foreman was well known for being there's a reason why all my sons are called George. It's because I can't remember any other name. Fighting Joe Fraser was a mess. He was bankrupt by the end. I think he was an alcoholic at one point. Was penniless. Loads of them. Well known. And yes, this is a very valid point. You're right. Boxing is obviously significantly different to other contact sports, apart from the martial MMA. This is where I'm deeply concerned about the UFC and Bellator and the other MMA promotion, the other fighters in MMA. They take some really serious blows to the head, and it is. And you look at Ronda Rousey. When all is said and done, I bet you with Ronda Rousey, when she passes away. And she took some fair blows to her head as a women's MMA fighter. Concussion with women seems to be more severe, actually, than men. And it's only in the last few years we're seeing more and more women get involved in boxing, MMA, the other martial arts, rugby union, rugby league. And it does seem that concussion with women, it affects them more seriously than men. Now, whether that's their physiology, their the makeup, because they have a higher body fat index than men. That physiologically they're built differently with the muscle mass, the amount of fat in their bodies, the thickness of their skulls is actually they've got less broad, brows. So their skulls are actually ironically differently shaped. So we obviously have a very, as you can see, pronounced. We have caveman brow. Women don't, so they don't have that very pronounced forehead, basically. And so it'd be interesting to see a study of concussion on women rugby players, women boxers, women ice hockey players, MMA, and the men. It would be interesting to see a study when it comes to the contact sports between let's say 10 women, 10 men, and follow them over a period of 10 years, for example, and look at the impact of concussion and head contact on them and other injuries as well, because it seems they're more likely to do their ACLs than men. Women are more likely to have knee injuries. They've got it's fact. It seems to be facts that women have a higher chance of requiring a full knee reconstruction than men. We're seeing it a lot in women's football. We're seeing it a lot in women's rugby. That a higher percentage of female players do their knees in than men, which is very interesting. I think the actual percentage of players, let's say you have 100 players, or yeah, let's go with the whole 100 players. Out of those 100 players, the women have a higher percentage of players who have knee injuries than men. And again, it's to do with how just physically, a women's but it'll be very interesting to. We've had this discussion before, having a look at joint injuries. So your knees, your ankles, your elbows, your shoulders. When it comes to dislocations and tear and ligament tears and muscular tears, it'd be very interesting to see that as well. And again, that's where the scientific study and working with team doctors and physios and having a readout on the injury reports or on players would be very interesting. But no, it's not just boxers, as I say. But you look, we lost Ricky Hatton, and it now was sadly proven to be the case that he took his own life. And he obviously was very open and public about his battles with depression and mental health and his struggles with anxiety and mental health, and very open. And of course, he died very young. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with like Antonio Brown, for example, because he's had a track record when he was a player and since being a player with his off-field indiscretion, his legal issues, and some of his legal issues are very, very serious. And of course, he's been charged with attempted murder, and he's been extradited from Dubai back to the US. And it's a watch this space with Antonio Brown. It really is watch this space. Edwin Valero, I can definitely read up on him, but from what I gather, it was one of the worst cases, of post-retirement and things like that. But you do raise some good points, though. Very good points. And look, I look at like the NRL, for example, and you look at the list, and the same with the AFL, and you look at the list of players, current and past, who've had their legal indiscretions, and you have to go and put two and two together and go, this is troubling. And now what we see with rugby union, with the number of ex-players who've got Parkinson's, motor neurone disease, obviously a big talking point, with obviously Lewis Moody being the latest player diagnosed with it. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how Lewis Moody how the disease progresses with Lewis Moody. It really will. It really will. But then you look at the non-contact sports like swimming and tennis. There's actually a high proportion of all these athletes who've had motor neurone disease. Some of them are still alive now. Who've also succumbed to the condition. And again, research. If you are you see it doesn't matter what sport you participate. If you are a pro athlete, ironically, if you are a professional athlete, you are more likely to develop motor neurone disease or the related diseases than a non-professional athlete. So something, whether it's their diet, it's their training, it's the physical exertion they put themselves under, the cumulative build-up of all the injuries in the body, let alone head knocks. But other injuries that they sustain, be it muscular and they, ligaments and sprains. That's it. That's also very interesting. The amount of professional athletes who end up with motor neuron disease. So that's something I find really interesting. Is scientific research and professional sport. It's always very interesting. But in regards to concussions and what we now know about repeat head injuries, and I do think the NRL might actually extend the mandatory stand down period from 11 days. I believe when they first brought it in was 8 days, and now it's 11. So I think as time goes on, that mandatory stand down period following a concussion will be longer. But it'd be interesting what they look at in pre-match warm up and in week to week training, and what they'll be looking at with the pre-season training as well. That will be interesting to see if there's any changes brought in to be stricter around when outside of game time. That would be really interesting to see if the NRL, as an example, gets stricter with the head injury protocols and just injury protocols in general around warm up and in the week training as well, training camps. But no, that's some interesting points raised there. Some very interesting points raised there, and again, that's discussion worthy, and and quite interesting. So I do think science has a part to play, and research has a part to play in working out, how things pan out. But Eli Katoa, I know tomorrow morning, as I say, came back to play, but I think the circumstances surrounding the bleed on the brain that he had were different to what happened to Eli Katoa. But I think, as I say, exception rather than the rule, which is interesting. But you are a Sunderland fan. Sunderland are doing quite well on their return to the Premier League. And they do have the North East bragging rights right now as well, considering that they are above Newcastle in the league. So there is that. I think the three promoted teams are playing quite solidly so far this season, and are doing a lot better than the last three promoted teams we had last season. Also, there are apparently 10 interested parties who declared interest to the administrators at Sheffield Wednesday. So the Sheffield Wednesday situation will also be quite interesting to see how that plays out. We know that 10 interested parties have approached the administrators about declaring their interest to bid for the club. So it will be very interesting to see what happens at Sheffield Wednesday. And what happens there. I do think the Christmas period this year is going to be quite interesting because we've got three international. We're going now into the third international break of the season, which I think completely disrupts the flow of the season. It completely disrupts any momentum team build, and if some teams are struggling, they can, completely disrupts the league season. And post Christmas, we have two more international breaks to negotiate as well before the World Cup. But no, the Christmas period, I think this year is going to be very interesting because of the expanded nature of the World Cup next summer. And therefore, you have a shortened off-season and a shortened pre-season. It's going to be very interesting to see how all teams across all leagues deal with the festive period. I think it's going to be very, very interesting, especially that we'll focus on the UK, we'll focus on England and Scotland and Wales. It is going to be exceptionally interesting to see how clubs here in the UK deal with the festive period. And of course, you've got the third round of the FA Cup, and that adds fixture congestion. The weather obviously will have its part to play on it, and that will impact, because there will be games postponed. There will be games where the weather has an impact. And I personally think this winter is going to be like 2018, 2017 and 2018. Now, I don't think you were a subscriber then, but the Beast from the East of 2018 in February and March. If you look on the channel, that's that period of time when it just. But it was about. I think there was one night I'm in my old back garden and it was a blizzard, and it really was. And it was about minus. And I live in the south of England. I live to the west of London. It doesn't always. We have had some cold nights down here. I'm not gonna lie. The Thames Valley is weird. How the Thames Valley and the surrounding valleys of where the rivers flow into it, like the Blackwater and Kennet and things like that, and the Wey and all that. All the other rivers that flow into the Thames. It's a weird shape because it sort of funnels things in towards London. And where I live, there's quite a lot of steep hills, and it sort of funnels it in. If you look at my weather playlist, look at the Beast from the East, and you can see the snow that came down. And that came down in a very short space of time. It wasn't as if that's like 5 days worth of snow, it's that much. It really came out the sky out of nowhere, and then the temperature plummeted. And then there was like a week or two where it starts to melt, but there was still snow on the ground. And then St. Patrick's Day, and it came down again. And it was cold for a good month. Really cold. And we had several bands of snow coming. And that was a weird winter. But 2009, so the 2000 and 2009, so 2009 and 2009, 2010 were the other winters where it really, especially 2009, 2010, that was brutal, that winter across the country. That was the winter my dad passed away. So January would be 16 years since my dad, but I tell you now, that was an absolutely brutal winter, especially down here. That snowed a lot. A significant amount of snow came down. And I remember that because that was in the early-ish days of Facebook. And so yeah, that was, but again, that was before Christmas. It snowed a bit, then it stopped, and then post Christmas it snowed a significant amount. All the way up from January to March, it snowed almost on the regular. And then the winter of 2020, 2021, we had snow again on the regular on the month. So we had snow at the end of down here. We had snow in November. We had snow in December, January, February, March, and into April. I remember the first. Again, look at my weather playlist. You will both channels actually, because on the other channel as well, I've got some weather playlists. But again, on a monthly basis, we had snow at least once a month from the end of November through to the beginning of April. On the 2020, 2021 winter. That was a really cold one. I seem to remember, and again that impacts matches, getting to grounds, getting away from grounds, and then I believe we're due to have it's going to get colder from this weekend. Now I've got a funny feeling, and this is coming from someone who's also lived up a mountain and has been out in minus 30 with wind chill factor that made it minus 56 with wind chill. That was fun. I was at altitude, and I was in the Alps, and it was already cold, and it already was snowing, and then it just went blizzard and temperature up like a stone. I've got a sneaky suspicion that we are going to have a cold winter, and it is going to snow. And the reason why I say that is every time we've had a really, really hot summer, we've had a lot of snow the following winter or two. Now, this summer was the hottest on average that we've had. 2022 was obviously the hottest individual day we've had. And there was a bit of snow over that winter. Now, not much down here, but there was snow. I have a very sneaky suspicion that we are. I think so. I think 2017 was a reasonably hot summer, if I remember, and then it really snowed in 2018 after Christmas. At the moment, I don't think they have said it's going to plummet, but we are above average for temperatures. And generally, when the autumn is actually above average temperatures, the winter is off a cliff, and it tends to be when they say we have an Indian summer, it tends to mean that that winter is gonna be. And I do believe they have predicted a colder, snowier winter than last year as well. One way to tell if you're going to actually have, and this is how nature tells you it's going to be potentially a bit of a cold one. If you've got, I don't know if locally, if you've got any holly bushes or blackberry bushes or any kind of bushes and trees that fruit in the autumn, if they fruit early, like holly, so you get the holly sprigs of holly with the red little berries, and if you've got brambles with, is it blueberries or blackberries? If they fruit early, um, and fruit more than normal, generally speaking, you're generally going to have a very harsh winter. It's just rule of thumb. It's something I've noticed. And I've got a couple of little short holly trees growing around the communal garden, mostly at that end. So where my strawberries and my mint plants are, around there's actually quite a few. Um, it's actually from the neighbour's garden that hangs over a few little holly trees, holly bushes, and they were fruiting in July, August. They started to fruit, and they really there was a lot of them. And then today on my bin round, I noticed there was a lot of red, especially the little red berries, not just on holly bushes, but on a lot of multitude. I noticed a lot of a lot of them, a lot of berries. And if you notice a lot of berries on the shrubs and bushes that grow them, um, even later into the autumn as well, when if it's above, I honestly think we are going to have a not just a cold snap, but a cold winter in general from about, I would say, the second half of November onwards. I think it will ultimately. I think we might actually get snow um, early this year. Um, I'm going to be really nerdy and actually, I'm going to ask the internet. I'm going to see if that. I believe they have mentioned it's potentially going to be a colder winter. Right. Let's have a look. Ah, okay. Okay. Potentially more likely to be average, but there is a hint that there's a potential for. I'm going to have to check to see if Scotland has that. Yes, here we go. So in the coming weeks, so as I say before Christmas, the build up to Christmas, obviously we know it's going to be windy and rainy. We know that, but so that's the unsettled start for the rest of this week. But then there's the potential for colder air shift to a colder, more northerly flow could bring wintry showers. And actually, where I am is about 200 meters above sea level. And the reason why I know that is there's a trig point, which, if you look on my Instagram, I've taken photos of before, which I think is at 295 meters above sea level. I'm actually surprisingly quite high where I am in the south of England. I'm based at the base of the Chilterns, but there's I'm on the North Down. I'm based at in between the Chilterns and the North Downs, and I'm sort of on the North Downs technically. Um, Before they officially start in Surrey and Sussex, I'm literally just you class them as the foothills. But there's apparently a shift to colder, more northerly flow, which will increase wintry showers. High pressure is a possibility of spells of high pressure building, which could lead to dry, frosty, and foggy conditions. But the timing is uncertain. So actually, but they're not overly confident of. But we have got a La Nina weather pattern, which means technically a um, colder spell. But it varies. But um, but then on another one, it's saying that we are shaping up to be a colder than average winter with a higher risk of frost and snow occurring earlier in January and February. So there's that one. And then there's another one that's saying, but it varies. Oh shit. That's the US. Oh god. But then there's another website that's saying that there's potential 20 centimeters of snow somewhere because they're suggesting that this cold spell is going to come in. Um, but it seems to be varying. So there's a couple of websites saying it's going to be about average, and then there's a lot more saying the potential for colder to below average. Yeah, Wrexham. I think Wrexham have had a little turn in form. Blackburn have had a little turn in form. Scotland winter break. Does the SPFL have a winter? I think Scotland does. It's been very mild. I mean, again, if you look on my Instagram, which is just the sports boffin, I did a bit of the Thames Path on Thursday on one of my days off, which is why I didn't post anything on YouTube for a couple of days. And I walked a good 10-mile section of Thames Path, and I got so hot and sweaty that I was stripping down, and that's weird. And I was like, this is the first week of November, and it's pushing 18. It was pushing 20 degrees at one point. So I'm getting naked. I was like, SPFL still have winter break. Let's have a look. Oh, there is no winter break in the Scottish League, but they're not playing any games on Boxing Day this year because it's on a Friday, and we only have the one. So when people go, "There's no Boxing Day football," it's because Boxing Day is on a Friday, and so the broadcasters and but no, what was it? No, it has been exceptionally mild, exceptionally mild. So yeah, Thursday I went out, and it wasn't particularly cold, and I took two jackets with me. One is just my warm, non-raining jacket because it's not waterproof, and the other one is one of my waterproof jackets, which is thin, but actually is actually surprisingly warm for a thin jacket. And I had to swap them over first because there was a little bit of drizzle, so I swapped my jackets over, and then in the end I put both jackets in my rucksack and just wore this jumper. And even then, I had the sleeves rolled up and then my t-shirt underneath untucked because I was sweating quite a bit. Walk, I was, but no, there's no official winter break in Scotland this season, and they've got no Boxing Day football. No Boxing Day football. They've got a game. There's games scheduled for the 20th and games scheduled for the 27th. So exactly the same as here in England. And fans aren't happy with the lack of Boxing Day football at all. They're not happy. Well, if you're a Scottish football fan or Irish or Welsh, obviously those matches are crucial because obviously those nations are trying to either get automatic qualification for next year's World Cup or at least get into the playoffs, which then will be played in the next international break. So obviously they want to make sure that they're still got a chance to qualify. But for England, for example, this is the floor in qualification if you've already qualified before the last set of internationals. Although in saying that, on a coaching standpoint, I think this gives Tuchel the chance to experiment with his lineup, experiment with some combinations, and give some other players some game time. and some international experience, which is crucial, and it gives some players some time in camp who may not have been in international camp before. And so, on a coaching standpoint and on a squad standpoint, there are a lot of benefits. On a fan standpoint, yeah, it's frustrating that we are, what, 2.5, is it 2.5, 3 months into the season? Next season, there's going to be 2 less international breaks, and there is a sort of a international think tank with the UEFA, and I think FIFA have gone to all the confederations. There is sort of like a think tank in place where they're discussing changes to the international calendar. But then the Africa Cup of Nations takes place in January every 2 years. So what do you do because they've ditched the Confederations Cup, which in my opinion was a mistake when they did that. I think the last one was in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, but in 2013. So they've ditched the Confederations Cup. The Africa Cup of Nations is every 2 years, which poses headaches. And then, of course, you've got the South American Copa America and how that's played, I think, also every 2 years, I believe, as well. I'm not 100% certain on that. So, but they are meeting to discuss further changes to qualify. This happens quite regularly, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from. Is we've seen changes to the international calendar multiple times. Like the Nations League was brought in as example because fans across the world were like, we hate these pointless friendlies, and yet we still have international friendlies in international breaks. One of them was not great, but I tell you something, Doku was something else yesterday by today's standard. Took the man on, dribble, great goal, at least you. I was watching Jason McAteer on the on Paul Kent's podcast, the Rugby League podcast, and he was on as a guest because it was filmed before the second Ashes test up in Liverpool, and he was on as a guest, and he said now with the academy system, they're coached to a system, and that personal responsibility and playing what's in front of you, that maverick streak that a lot of players is discouraged. Not because you don't have characters in the game, but it's discouraged to problem solve. That's the term, problem solve, which is where a lot of these great goals. Look at that goal in the Canadian League final in the snow, in the Canadian League. Was it at the weekend in the blizzard? Things like that are coached out of players now. That maverick streak, thinking on your feet and problem solving. You notice now a lot of players keep looking at the bench. What do we do? We're 1-0 down. What do we do? And the best coaches like your Wengers and your Fergusons and your Dalgleishes back in the day and all that, they would get their players to problem solve. Brian Clough, problem solve. And yeah, I do suggest you look at the Kenty prime time. Kenty Blitzed. I think it's Kenty. Is it Kenty Prime Time? I think it is Kenty Prime Time. Jason McAteer episode, which is on Fanatics TV's YouTube channel. You watch that. I think it's an hour and a half where he's on the podcast, and they ask him about are players overcoached and structure, and he goes, yeah, the academy system. You've got to get past Jason McAteer's obviously very thick Birkenhead accent, which is not actually a Scouse accent; it's a Birkenhead accent. It's from the Whittle, but you've got to listen to what Jason McAteer says, because he's now taking on a director of football kind of role now, and he's doing various things. But you have to listen to, yes, the Irish Whittle man, but you have to listen to when he's asked about players and the Maverick side, because obviously the Reece Walsh, they're talking about Reece Walsh and all that, and he goes, it's been coached out of players. Players are coached to follow a system and a method. But when he was a player, because he was a very good winger, he came to professional football quite late. He didn't go through like an academy reserve system. He actually went through Marine. He played for Marine. There you go, famous ex-player, and he obviously first turned professional at Bolton. But when he was in his formative years and when he was playing in the Premier League up until about the time he retires, players of his generation were told to problem solve in attack. Not defense, in attack. So they're obviously coached defensive systems, but then they're told in attack sometimes be a bit more free-flowing, play what's in front of you and problem solve, communicate. and certain players were used as subs because they were problem solvers. And you listen to him, you listen to him answer the question or just talk about the topic, and he goes, "We were problem solvers. We were told to problem solve, communicate with your teammates." And now they don't do that. They keep looking when a game's going wrong. They look at the bench and expect the coach to problem solve for them. Which in part you want the coach to have some solutions. But yes, do I watch rugby union? I do. I don't watch any of the autumn internationals, partly because I just don't want to pay for TNT Sports and Amazon because that's just rip-off prices. I don't follow it as religiously as I used to. I don't watch all the Six Nations anymore, and with the England games going behind paywall or going on to, are they on ITV or going behind on TNT Sky? Can't remember now. Which I think is going to hurt. Argentina putting 50 points on Wales. Yeah, not good. Italy beating Australia. You can see when people were saying, "Oh, Italy should be kicked out, the Six Nations replaced with Georgia." Yeah, I don't. I find that conversation disappears when Italy aren't struggling, and it's Wales or Scotland struggling, or France or Ireland or England when they're having a bit of a down. That disappears, that relegation talk. When Italy have just beaten Australia, who are hosting the next World Cup. There you go. I think you compare rugby union to rugby league, and I make reference of this with my Women's Rugby World Cup coverage. So the match reviews and looking at that tournament when it came to head contact and HIAs and etc. And then what we've seen with Ellie Qatar and what happened a week or so ago. I think there needs to be a happy medium, which is very, very hard when it comes to play well. But I think looking at where rugby union's headed with constant, and I mean constant rule changes around officiating, around rule changes, it's become a mess. Italy are massively improved over the last 5-6 years. Australia have got problems. That's the simple way to look at it. Australia have declined as a nation. Italy have improved as a nation. So they're going in two different directions. Although both would beat Wales every day of the week. So I'm just putting that out there. Both are better than Wales right now, so that's not hard. But Australia are not the team they were, and they haven't been for some time. Italy are not the team they were, and they are improving year on year. So that's the best way I could answer that question. But Australia, when it comes to rugby union, there are a lot of structural issues. And this is why Rugby 360, this R360, is so dangerous to Australian rugby. Not just Australia, but all rugby unions, but very, very dangerous for Australia because of the financial situation rugby union in Australia finds itself in, and the structural problems that rugby union finds itself in, the funding, sponsorship, TV deals. There's a player development. Yes, I wouldn't say all the best talent goes to the NRL because you've got the AFL there as well. And the growth of association football, soccer, they call it soccer, we call it association football because we're normal people. I'm joking. Obviously, I love my Australian subscribers. I love my Australian viewers and Kiwi viewers. But I think with the growth in football, soccer to them, but football, I mean, the A-League is still not strong, but with the growth there and with some of the Australian players becoming actually household names, and the women's, what the Matildas have done for the women's game. The AFL obviously is the AFL. Obviously, they're trying to get into Tasmania and sort that Tasmanian expansion out, but the AFL is the AFL. It's played in every state and territory, it's Aussie rules. And of course, the NRL with Rugby League going to Perth and that expansion. Yeah, rugby union is at threat, and it's not just from the NRL. It's actually a Victorian upper class term, so it's upper class slang because you sock the ball. You see, give it a good. It's like it's basically a Victorian upper class public schoolboy term. That's where it comes from. Whereas your average average working class lads up north call it football. You had association football, you had rugby football, the RFU, and you had rugby league football, which is rugby league. And they're all terms, and you've got Gaelic football that the Paddies play across RSC, like, that's my worst northern accent. So you had the four forms of football played in this country, which is association, which is kicking with your foot, the Irish Gaelic football, which is played obviously across the water. You have rugby union football, the Rugby Football Union, which is the RFU, and you've got the Rugby Football League, which is rugby league. Post 1895, because it becomes the Northern Football Union, and later on it becomes rugby league. But that's your four footballing codes in the UK and Ireland. And then soccer is an upper class term that fell out of colloquial use quite. If you watch some films from the 60s, actually, like the Ealing comedies and the Pinewood films from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the black and whites, as I call them, British cinema. You will hear that term used, but you've got to remember a lot of the actors are classically trained. And they would have done a bit of Shakespeare, a bit of bisexuality, a bit of buggery, and going to boarding school. And because obviously a lot of the directors like Alfred Hitchcock and all that were actually from the upper stratas of society, because you had to be able to read and write quite well to be an early cinema. It was seen as quite an acquired thing to be a classically trained actor with the Shakespeare Company. The word soccer is a late Victorian upper class slang term that sort of carried over. You will hear it also in early broadcasting by the BBC on the radio and on the Pathé newsreels. And of course, then at this time, obviously, a lot of what we would call working class sports here were seen as upper class sports in the US. And of course, you get that kind of when we're sending the Pathé newsreels over in the 20s and 30s. The upper class Americans see that at Princeton. There you go. There's a good in Yale. They're already, bear in mind, they're playing cricket. They are playing cricket. I did a video on that the other day. They see these Pathé newsreels coming over. This is before, obviously, satellite TV and all that, and the what we call the television age, so pre-World War II, and they just pick up, the word soccer, and they use that because they've got American football, and it stuck. And then, of course, the term soccer over here, you will hear the occasional upper class, Etonian, Cambridge or Oxford. You will hear the occasional, but it's sort of now gone out of use in this country and, of course, across Europe, which then we take football to South America, whereas the US and Canada, it's seen as a sort of colonial word because obviously the colonial administrators and the military would obviously play games. And of course, the officers at the time would all be upper class, and they'll be the ones organising the physical, physical training for the soldiers. Same in Australia and New Zealand, and the colonial administrators and the army officers would be all upper class, all public schoolboy educated, all going to Oxford and Cambridge and some of the other posh universities. And of course, it's an upper class slang word of colloquial English. And there you go. And so, obviously, during the Empire years and Dominion years, as we call them, when Canada and South Africa and Australia and New Zealand vote for Dominion status, so they're technically independent states and have their own foreign policy, and they can raise their own taxes and have their own currencies and all that shit. Again, before World War I, World War II, obviously you still have the colonial administrators who are all upper class. And from the wealthy aristocracy, and of course they would organise football matches, soccer matches, whereas the working classes, we just call it football. Hence why in Australia they call rugby league footy and Aussie rules footy, because they're working class. But the term soccer stays there because that's what they hear the sport called. But they might call it English football or association football, because they've got Australian football, which is Aussie rules. And of course, rugby league was the Rugby Football League. By that point, it's no longer called the Northern Union by that point. And when they start playing, right, the Rugby Football League, which becomes the New South Wales Rugby League in 1908, that's why rugby league over in Australia is called footy. And that's why Aussie rules over in Australia is called footy, to distinguish it from soccer, which was association football. And because you've got multiple codes. But that's where it comes from. It's former Victorian upper class gent who's been to Eton and has gone to Cambridge, you see, who's also had a bit of buggery at Harrow, colonial administrator with pipe, speaks Queen's English, you see, enunciates words, and might have met Oscar Wilde in an opium den and got buggered, you see. It's fine. You've got to have a bit of dark humour, but yes, that's basically where it comes from. But with the working classes, when it comes to by the First World War, if not Second World War, it generally doesn't reach the lower middle class working classes. They don't call it soccer; they call it football. To them, when you're playing football, the term rugby and rugby league obviously is a later kind of a development, because you've got the RFU and the RFL, but they just call it rugby and playing a bit of league, playing a bit of union. But depending, playing a rugby club, you don't distinguish calling it rugby football because you play football. But they're all footballing codes. I've done a video looking at all the different sports that call themselves football, the different types of football. There's a lot. There is a lot. There's a video, I think I did it in 2018 or 2019. I did a video looking at all the types of football in the world, and I came up with, I think I found about 11 or 12 versions of football that have the origin in that one sport. Home nations. Yeah, but what people don't realise is when France made it the Five Nations in the late 1890s, early 1900s, they couldn't win a game to save their lives for 20, 30 years. They sucked. England have got more wooden spoons than any other nation when it comes to the old 4, 5, and now 6 nations. England have finished bottom on a percentage. Bear this in mind, more than Italy had. But yeah, I find that stupid. They got the Chiefs from the Super Rugby. The logos are completely different for starters. That's old news. That news came out literally within the 2-3 days of the name being unveiled. The Chiefs from Super Rugby were like, we're going to sue. Really, your logos look completely different, and the kit colours look completely different, and that's kind of embarrassing. But it just shows how desperate rugby union is for money. But that's going to be a very expensive, pointless lawsuit when they should be more concerned about R360, which we will see if it happens. I mean, Payne Haas is heavily linked, with leaving the Broncos. Ryan Pappenhausen's linked now that he's a free agent with R360. Personally, I think Payne Haas, I don't know how he fits into a rugby team unless you put him as a flanker or number 8, but then he's got to learn how to scrum properly and lift in the line out and be lifted in the line out. And he's got to be involved in every ruck and maul. And I think that would completely change how he has to play the game. His tackle technique would have to change. His ball carrying technique would have to change. He won't be able to offload as much. He'll probably have to make twice as many tackles as he does now. And he's going to get tackled a lot more. And I can't see Payne Haas being an outside centre somehow in rugby union. It just doesn't work. He needs to be around the action. And if you're an outside centre, you might make 3 tackles in an entire game and carry the ball twice. And I think he'll be complete. These rugby league players being linked to union, unless you are a halfback or 5'8" or a fullback, potentially a winger, but I haven't seen any wingers linked. I don't think you can make that transition. I really don't think you can make the transition to rugby union. That's why most of the dual code internationals who really hit it, apart from Sonny Bill Williams, but we can question if he really actually really did impact Union as much as he claims he did. He was part of a very good side. I don't think Sonny Bill Williams was the best rugby union player personally. Israel Folau, I think he was a winger. He was a winger / centre. He wasn't a playmaker. Stick him out wide, which they did. Stick him under the high ball. Fullbacks and wingers do that all the time. Then it turns out he used his religion to cover up his homophobia. Then he gets sacked embarrassingly and goes back to rugby league and then doesn't really do much. There you go. But he got a nice payout. So there you go. It was all about money. Which is why Rugby Union Australia is so buggered now financially. Is actually Israel Folau taking to court and getting paid about 7.58 million Australian dollars. I think that would do it. And then costing him a load of sponsorship. I think that would do it as well. But Rugby Australia was already going down the toilet before Israel Folau decided to be a homophobic prat and using his religious beliefs as why he was told, stop posting homophobic shit on social media. You're going to keep doing it. Our sponsors don't like that. And you're in breach of contract because we told you to keep your personal and religious views off social media and keep them private. You made them public, and now you're causing a bit of a PR nightmare because there are those right-wing conservatives who will support you, and then there's those left-wing nut jobs who won't support you, and now you've pissed off the fan base, and you've pissed off the broadcasters, you've got their agenda, and now you've pissed off our sponsors, and we have no money because you're taking us to court. That's my take on the Israel Folau situation. He said the quiet bit out loud. He said the common sense bit out loud, but he said the quiet bit out loud. The whole rainbow LGBT inclusive, I think this is why the Israel Folau saga is the reason why we don't have openly gay players. Because it then becomes a little bit of a lottery about, what happens. What the ex-NRL TV do, that's in 2027 anyway. I think that's a year away. No, that's 2 years away, actually. That's 2027, so it's 2 years away. I believe negotiations are probably happening. But again, those are corporate negotiations and contractual negotiations. I could be a period drama actor. Well, I didn't used to work at a comedy club, so I've seen some pretty shocking attempts at comedy. And I've seen some really crap comedians. I've met a couple of really obnoxious actors, so I'd rather not be a drama actor or a comedic actor. I would much rather not get involved in that, because most of the comedians and actors I've come across by obviously working in a comedy club, and my mate's mum runs another comedy and drama and a live music and comedy venue. I will say this, most of the comedic stand-ups and the actors I've met are absolute knobheads. Don't have a lot nice to say about them. Really, I don't. They're I'd rather not, because I can get sued. No, Freddie Flintoff was just a pisshead. He wasn't a knob. He was a bit of a drunk. This is when he was famously still an absolute. This is when he was still heavily drinking. I don't think he's that bad now, but this again, we're going back like 15 years. This is about the time of his boxing. So we're going back to 2012. I didn't think he was he was still a heavy drinker at the time, and he was a little bit of an embarrassing drunk. But I don't think Freddie Flintoff is he's not the worst famous person I've met. Barry McGuigan is quite funny. Barry McGuigan's got the Xbox is quite sharp. He's got a sharp wit. VAR is consistently inconsistent. Yeah, that's why we love to hate it. VAR's a mess. It's been badly implemented, and it's lost the purpose of why it was brought in back in 2017 when it was experimented in 2018. for the World Cup has now got lost in translation. You think a lot of what rugby league and rugby union agents are trying to use leverage. Well, rugby union's got no money, and I think rugby union's more at risk than league. But at the same time, World Rugby and the domestic unions, they've got to figure out better funding models. This has been warned that the game is in a financially unstable footing for a long time. It's not just Wales struggling, or Australia, or New Zealand, Africa, or the English Premiership. This has been warned for some time. This predates the pandemic. This goes back 2 World Cups ago, if not more. Best and worst person I've met. Oh Christ, Nicholas Holt, the guy from Skins, and About a Boy. Met him. Don't like him. He's the same age as me. His parents live down the road from me, and he went down. His school was around the corner from my house. And on their Christmas party, or it was their Christmas party. He snuck into my old local, and most of his mates were underage, and this pub didn't have door staff. This was a rough locals only pub. You came in here and you caused problems. You were going out the side door, the front door, quite quickly and quite violently. And you get rather hurt. I might have got involved in a bit of a scuffle with some of his mates, because obviously the licensing people and the police regularly came round this pub because of some of the clientele, and we were, before the old Bill turned up, we were trying to tell him to fuck off, because the pub will lose its license and get shut down, or the landlord get shit if you're in here and you're trying to pull a fast. And then guy behind the bar goes, "Where's Bob?" And he's like, "He's having a quick fag." Like, oh, and they got a bit lippy. And I went, "Your mate want to because he's gonna get hurt." He him and his mates, they didn't stay very long. When Barman came back, was like, my mate Paul, it sort of, he turned the cameras off, and a few of us decided to have a bit of a ruck. And this is before some of the hard locals turn up. I mean, we're just like, the working class lads who were a bit spotty. We're talking builders, plasterers, paint decorators. We had a couple of boxers used to drink in there, and we're talking gypsy boxers as well. We had a couple of army vets, RAF vets. I think one ex-Royal Marine. You had a couple of guys who were out on license, on tag. This was literally like a proper locals. No, it's just his mate was a bit of a knob, and he was trying to basically buy his mates on the underage mates he had, because it was their Christmas party. They were like 17. They were not quite 18. He was trying to buy them, a round of drinks. And so he was the one getting ID'd, and I think even he was underage. I think he's a day younger than me as well. His birthday's a day after mine, if I remember. And it didn't go down well with. It was either a New Year's party or a Christmas party they were having at their sixth form. Did not go down well in the boozer. It went down like a sack of shit. And then some of the other nut jobs who drank in the pub turned up, and it got a bit punchy. Yeah, it got a bit punchy. It got a bit. I think his birthday's. I can't remember. I know his birthday's the same week as mine. I know that much. But it got a bit punchy. It was like, I suggest you. The reason why they come in there is they knew there was a door staff that worked on the pub door. Let's just put it that way. But it got a bit. Yeah, I'm the 6th of December. I'm the day before. I'm the 6th of December, 1989. So yeah. So it got a bit punchy, and there was some characters who drank in that pub who were a bit dangerous. Let's just say that there was some organised, there was some criminality, there was some characters who wouldn't look out of place in Snatch or Lockstock. There was some dangerous individuals used to drink in that pub. So it got a bit. it got a bit fighty. Some other famous people I've met. Oh God, Philip Schofield. Yeah, met him. Wish I hadn't. Steve McManaman, Robbie Fowler. They were actually a good laugh, actually. On the racehorses. I've met quite a few, actually. I've met quite a few. Lee Evans, not a big fan of Lee Evans. Chris Moyles, definitely not a big fan of Chris Moyles. Ollie Murs, nice bloke, but it's just Ollie Murs. He's obviously he's a celebrity. He's a very good musician, and he's obviously on the radio a lot as well. He's actually Ollie Murs is pretty normal. No, they're just generally knobs. And when I say knobs, it's their attitudes. Ollie Murs is all right. Chris Moyles is an absolute knobhead, but that's a well-known fact. Chris Moyles is not the most popular guy on radio or TV, honestly. I met Ice Cube. David Williams, dickhead. Ice Cube, hilarious. Not even going to joke. Ice Cube is absolutely fucking hilarious. But no, Chris Moyles, don't like him. Met him a few times. My mum's met Robbie Williams. She didn't like him very much. I'm not going to go into the incident back in 1999 where my mum gave him a good, I think it was either a right or a left hook because he pinched her ass and she didn't particularly appreciate his groping, so she turned around and properly split him open, I tell you. Freddie Flintoff, when I met him, he just had a few pints too many. I don't think he was. It was just a little bit, he weren't rude or anything, but he just had a few pints too much, and he was just like, oh, I know you're rich, I know you're fat. Ian Poulter, he's an absolute bell end. But again, this is one interaction where they might be having a bad day. You don't know, but Ian Poulter is he's a lot of people don't like Ian Poulter. Honestly, some of them, some of them have actually been all right. I mean, as I say, like Ice Cube was hilarious. Ollie Murs was quite polite and quite pleasant, but Ollie Murs just comes across as quite a normal human being. I've met quite a few famous journalists. I met Boris Johnson. Ironically, Boris Johnson's hilarious, but this is when Boris Johnson, before he was mayor of London. So we're going back nearly 20 years. Boris Johnson, when he was MP for Henley-on-Thames, I met him in the Angel by the River. Honestly, Boris Johnson's hilarious. I know he was a crap prime minister, and he's a bit of an idiot. But Boris Johnson's actually quite fun. He's actually surprisingly intelligent. I do Theresa May's bins. She's actually quite pleasant and quite friendly. But again, quite a decent human being for an ex-prime minister. A little bit. He does a little bit. Because obviously, now this is the thing. I know we're getting distracted from sport a little bit, but I have met quite a few. I mean, I will say this. I have met Jason McAteer, really nice bloke. Met Kenny Dalglish, really nice bloke. John Barnes, Ian Rush. Ian Rush, I couldn't understand a word he was saying, partly because he's from Flintshire and he's Welsh and he's got that Scouse Welsh accent. Can't understand a word he's saying. John Barnes, he's a really tall bloke. People don't realise how tall John Barnes actually is. No, honestly, John Barnes, he's a present. David James is a really nice guy as well. But he's also now a published children's author, David James. Met David James, he's a really nice bloke. I've met Robbie Fowler and Steve McManaman on multiple occasions. And I've got this story I've got with McManaman. I first met Steve McManaman when I was 7. At Anfield in 1996, day after my birthday in 1996. Now, they had just lost to Sheffield Wednesday 1-0 on the 7th of December 1996. Obviously, got a tour of the trophy room, got to meet both teams. I'm only like 7 years old, and Steve McManaman, I will admit, and Robbie Fowler were two of the players that came over and said hello to me. And okay, you're the special guest up here. You've been invited because my granddad managed to get 3 tickets for me, my sister, and himself because his friend was the club's lawyer and contract advisor. And obviously, it being my birthday weekend, it was a home game, and I think his name was Arthur Davidson. I believe his name was. He's long since passed away now. He passed away a few years before my granddad, so Arthur Davidson's been dead about, I'm going to say 7-8 years. But anyway, we go to the game, and obviously we just had normal regular seats, but it was post game that we got to go into the manager's box and the trophy room and meet all the players. And John Barnes, lovely bloke, David James. Now, this is when David James was Young Goalkeeper of the Year. He got voted by the PFA, Professional Footballers Association, as the Player's Choice of Goalkeeper of the Year and Young Player of the Year as well. That's when David James, the Spice Boys, that FA Cup final. This is the season after. This is the Spice Boys era. This is the season after that FA Cup final, where Liverpool had that green and white checked away. Oh God, that was a hideous away kit. But David James famously had his blonde hair at the time. Calamity James. This is before he was called Calamity James. This is when he was a very good goalkeeper. This is early in his career. I met a young Robbie Fowler, and the ball boy that day. The ball boy was a young Michael Owen. 2 years before Michael Owen, obviously in the World Cup, a year and a half before Michael Owen scores the wonder goal against Argentina in the World Cup. I met a young Michael Owen. My God, he is boring. He is a boring bloke. He's the worst one. But Jason McAteer is really friendly. But no, anyway, Stephen Manning and Robbie Fowler. I'm only 7 years old. Fast forward to 2010, Royal Ascot. Guess who I bump into at Royal Ascot? A certain Robbie Fowler and Steve McManaman. And they had remembered me all those years later from 1996 to 2010. And Steve McManaman gave me some tips for some of the horses. And I said, I'm looking at, I forget, Camford Cliffs was the name of the horse. And he was in the third race of the day. It was 3-1. And let's just say I got the win, got the nod. I said, yeah, back that horse. It's going to win. Put all your money on it. And of course, the odds changed. So when I put the money on it, was at higher odds. Goes on to win by a country mile. Goes from last to first on Swinny Bottom Bosch. And I didn't bet any. I got exceptionally buggered. I got very drunk that day. There's some photographs of me, which are embarrassing, that will never get shared. Where I am absolutely fucked. I am off my tits. Yes, yeah. They were very polite, yeah. And of course, Robbie Fowler played for Blackburn, so of course I'm going to have positive things to say about God, because they call him God on Merseyside. But no, they were quite nice. I felt, looking back on it now, obviously at the time when they were both playing for Liverpool, there was the Spice Boys era, as it's known. There was a lot of false allegations that certain newspapers in this country were printing about Fowler and McManaman and a few of the other players, the Spice Boys, about when that celebration where he scores the goal and he snorts the line. They were accusing Fowler, McManaman, I think a few other players in the squad. I think he might have been Jason McAteer actually, and Berger, Patrick Berger, and Stan Collymore was part of the team at the time. Of course, Stan Collymore was a very controversial character. I have met Stan Collymore. I didn't like him as a kid. You get a feeling about someone. I didn't like him then, and my mum. I obviously got home from the game, and it was late when we got in. We had to get a train back from Liverpool back to Euston, and then drive from London. This is before congestion charge, before Ken Livingstone's Mayor of London. This is a long time ago. This is 29 years ago. Come on, this wasn't like yesterday. And I didn't get home till very, very late. And my mum, obviously, in the morning was asking, "Oh, what players who did you meet?" And of course, I've got the program with all the autographs and each player by their name in the program. I've signed. They've signed by even the Sheffield Wednesday players on the program. They signed their names. Um, and I goes, "Who did you meet?" And when I was listing off all the players that I could remember, she went, "Oh, Stan Collymore, don't like him." And of course, the whole Eureka Johnson thing. But as a kid, I didn't like Stan Collymore. And then, of course, what happened with Eureka Johnson is around that time. And he never fully recovered from that. Yeah, no, I mean, McManaman's not the best commentator or pundit. I will say that. I don't think look. He was a great player. Um, you know, for England, Liverpool, Real Madrid, fantastic player. Fowler, great player for many clubs. Um, I find it interesting that when we're talking about regular punditry, regular commentary, McManaman for some reason gets more regular commentary and punditry gigs than Fowler. I find that really interesting because I would rather go with Robbie Fowler because he's played for more clubs and different styles of football, different systems, more managers than McManaman. But I think McManaman and Woodgate and Owen, when they all went over and Beckham to Real Madrid, I think a few of them made a mistake doing that. Honestly, even though they won trophies there, I think a few of them made it. I think they made mistakes doing that. And Michael Owen obviously didn't last at, and neither did Beckham or Woodgate. None of them lasted at Real Madrid. It was the Galacticos era, and while they were all fantastic players, and there's no doubt on that, I wouldn't say it's because he played for Madrid, because David Beckham doesn't do punditry, does he? Robbie Fowler doesn't really do. Woodgate doesn't really do punditry a lot. Now, whether that's for different reasons, I don't know. Whether they decided, well, Woodgate's obviously decided to go into management, go into coaching. I think Robbie Fowler's involved in a coaching capacity somewhere now. Michael Owen's obviously gone into horse racing. So Steve McManaman, they've gone into the racing side of horse race ownership and training and all that, and involved in another sport. And with horse racing, they might have a bit more time where it suits where they're horse race owners, and then it transfers over to having more time for media commitments, potentially. I don't know. Whereas Woodgate and Fowler seem to be more involved in the coaching side of things, be it as assistants and developmental coaches. And Woodgate's obviously had some managerial experience as a manager, and so you can see their career paths differ. Where Owen, while he still does commentary, McManaman still do commentary and punditry, they're involved in other business interests. Is a good way to put it. I don't think Robbie Savage is awful. I actually think Robbie Savage is all right. But again, I think maybe there is a little bit of bias towards certain clubs and the home nations with Robbie Savage. But I think Robbie Savage is all right. I don't mind a bit of Robbie Savage. I think he's all right. I think he had that bad boy persona. But I remember the Dion Dublin Robbie Savage headbutt when Savage is playing for Leicester, Dublin's playing for Villa. The headbutt, they're great friends. That's the irony of it. And I don't know. I don't think Dion Dublin's ever fully admitted about what actually led up to the headbutt. Whether Savage has just gone in for a tackle or has said something. But Robbie Savage, while some people slag him off and all that, I think it was brilliant him going on Strictly Come Dancing when he did. I thought that was hilarious. And that changed the persona of Robbie Savage a little bit. But you cannot deny both Dion Dublin and Robbie Savage. They were both ex-Man United players of the class of 92. They were actually Fergie players. They played at United at the same time. Now, bearing in mind, Dion Dublin was brought in, whereas Savage came through the youth system, but they both were Fergie players, so they're both ex-teammates. And the headbutt, I think it was a fiery game between Leicester and Villa back in the day, a very fiery game. Both at this time, both clubs are mid-table clubs. Fiery game, local rivals, and Robbie Savage is he's Robbie Savage. You're not going to change Robbie Savage's playing style. He was an agitator. He was a workhorse. Always one of the fittest players in the squad. Not the most. He would work his arse off for the team. Dion Dublin could play centre forward or centre back. Big physical presence. Again, another player who gave 110% every game. and those are two big characters in dressing rooms. They're they're club captains. They've captained clubs. They represented their country. They played for. These are two Fergie players as well. You've got to remember that. These are two players that play for Alex Ferguson. So I let that sink in. These are guys who are not going to back down for a challenge. But I don't know what led to the headbutt. That's the weird thing. I don't think Dion Dublin or Robbie Savage has ever really figured out what actually led to the headbutt. Obviously, Savage has gone in for a challenge. Dublin hasn't liked it. They've squared up. Savage feels like he's given a fair challenge. Dublin nuts him. They both get sent off. Make it make sense. Well, Rio Ferdinand. Rio Ferdinand's terrible. I like Micah Richards. I think Micah Richards is brilliant. Kevin Keegan, knobhead. Met him. I used to caddy it. I used to golf caddy, and I don't like Kevin Keegan at all. Absolutely belling. I'm not going to lie there. I've met Steve Coppell, Alan Pardew. Don't like Alan Pardew. I've met Steve Coppell, Alan Pardew, Terry Seymour. That's my dad's best mate from school. He used to play for Reading and Watford. I wouldn't call him famous. Obviously, Mike Warner, my old next door neighbour. So I used to actually have a professional football player as a next door neighbour. So I've met quite a few, but I used to work at a golf course. The area I live in, I mean, I met John Terry. Obviously, my ex-partner obviously used to live in Surrey. She actually now lives down the road from me. It was really weird. It's odd. She only lives a couple. It's just weird how. But my ex-partner, her parents are from Surrey. And of course, we used to go to pubs and restaurants and meet up with mates around Surrey and all that. And so, yeah, we have bumped into a few of the Chelsea players, a few of the Brentford players. I've met Adam Federici. Harper, the guy Harper used to play for Reading, lives down the road. Reading's training ground's only 2-3 mile walk away, and you actually get to see a lot of the players. There's a lot of players who still live locally, and I do their bins. Not Steve Harper. That's the goalkeeper. That's the goalkeeper played. Was it Steve Harper? Because there was a Harper who played for Newcastle, Geordie, and then you had Harper, the mixed race player who played for Reading. It's going to annoy me. His first name. It might be Steve Harper. I can't remember. I'm not a massive fan of John Terry. Let's just keep that as it is. I've met Vialli. There was a couple of other Chelsea players I met as a kid. We are harping on. But no, I met Adam Federici. I've met a fair number of the 2003 England Rugby World Cup winning squad, like Ben Cohen, Steve Thompson, Cockerell. Quite a few. I have talked about it before. He was brilliant. I met Vialli on more than one occasion. This is when he's first at Chelsea. One of his teammates, his son was in the year below me at school. Forget the lad's name. But they all came around, and a couple of them came around, and it was like talk about a subject. You had to talk about, an item or a thing, like as a little go away, and you have to talk about this item. And this kid brings his dad and Gianluca Vialli, and I want to talk about these two guys. It's like, it's Gianluca Vialli, about English black guy who plays for Chelsea. I forget the guy's name. It's going to really, really. I'm going to have to check the Chelsea squad of 94, 95, 96 now. I forget the guy's name, but his son was the year below me at school, and it's really, really going to annoy me. And Vialli was brilliant. Bear in mind, you've got a classroom of year 2, year 1, year 2, and year 3, basically about 50 school kids. Asking a lot of questions about what it's like being a professional football player, and he was brilliant. And that again, that sticks with. This is before I go to Anfield to watch my first professional game, and he was absolutely 95. Oh God, why? He was absolutely fantastic. I've got a season. I've got to find. I've got to remember this pissing. I need photos. It wasn't David Ross, was it? David Rosscastle. David was it? David Rosscastle. I have a funny feeling it was David Rosscastle. I've got a funny feeling David Rosscastle's son went to school with me. I don't know why. I've got a funny feeling, but no, I've met quite a few. Um, quite a few actually. Was it David Rosscastle? I've got a signed photo of him. Oh shit. Oh, I have a funny. Oh yeah, I've what year did I meet some of the London Broncos squad from the '95 challenge? I think I did. I'm trying to. I've got to see if it was David. Yes, it was David Rosscastle. Yeah, David Rosscastle. His son went to school with me. Oh, wow, that's sad. He died in 2001 in Slough. David Carlisle Rosscastle. Rocky. I can't believe he passed away. His son went to school with me. That's any tennis players? No, I don't think I don't think I have. Not that I can think of. There were some kids I went to school with who were really good at tennis, but I playmaker and winger. When? Yeah, it was David Rosscastle. I went to school with his son. Wow, he had 14 caps. Personal life. I went to school with his son, Ryan. There you go. Wow. I went to school with his son. Wow. Not for very long, money, is it? You know. That's really sad. I didn't realise he had passed away. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's cancer. That's my granddad had. And he was going through cancer at the same. Oh, I remember because they were in the same hospital at the same time at Wexham Park. I thought I met him more than once because obviously his son went to school with me, and my granddad, who survived the cancer, they were going through their treatment at the same time at the same hospital, and he passed away. And my granddad. Oh wow, that's mad. Oh wow, David. He was the first player to have played in the Premier League to pass away. And he was the first England player as captain in the 1990s to pass away. Oh wow! His son was mascot in their FA Cup final match against Liverpool, the one where they lose 2-1 up in. Oh crikey! Wow, that is. Didn't realise he passed away. He was only 33. That's mad. That's absolutely mad. He was only 33. Jesus. But yeah, David Rosscastle. That's the guy I met alongside Gianluca Vialli when he was a Chelsea player. Didn't realise he'd passed. Completely didn't realise he had passed away. That's mad. I've met a couple of darts players. Gavin Henson signed autograph, said nothing, head down. Yeah. But Gavin Henson, he was more famous for his Mrs. Charlotte Church and also being a bit of a pretty boy, wasn't he? I mean, he was there's no doubt Gavin Henson was a brilliant rugby player, but I think I wouldn't say the Playboy image, but with his obviously high profile relationship to Charlotte Church. I think that's overshadowed his on field ability. And then, of course, there was all the tabloids crap that surrounds. And I mean, Charlotte Church has even come out and said that their phones were being hacked, and obviously gave evidence to the phone hacking stuff. And I think that had an impact on him as well. I don't mind a bit of Charlotte Church, to be fair, but I do think the the press, the way the phone hacking scandal and how I think that had an impact on. But Gavin Henson sort of disappeared now, hasn't he? He sort of disappeared from public view. I don't know what he's doing now. Yeah, he was. He was a bit of a. He was the prima donna of rugby union. He was a bit of he was a bit of a pretty boy, wasn't he? A wee bit of a pretty boy. You wouldn't see him down a Welsh coal mine, would you? I think we'd be a bit afraid he might get dirty. But yeah, they were from the Welsh valleys, weren't they? They were, but yeah, unfortunately, Gavin Henson came across as a bit of a pretty boy. And I think that was part of his problem was the fake tan and the perfect hair and all this crap. But then at the same time, there was a lot of that was the period when sports high top level professional athletes, you know, were a little bit. Look, I've got ADHD, so I completely understand, being a little bit uncomfortable, with a lot of attention and when you're not in control of the situation. And look, you've got to understand, like when obviously Charlotte Church, and I do remember this because I followed this quite religiously at the time, the phone hacking scandal, and then of course the evidence given to the inquiry and all that. Charlotte Church was one of the people who gave evidence, and when you go through the amount of times the not just the news, the world, but various tabloid newspapers and magazines and websites were hacking her phones, and it's not a surprise that their relationship, their family life became a bit of a shit show, and there's no reason, and there's no doubt why his rugby career didn't maintain the level, and the heights, and it sort of went a bit wrong. And you've got to have some sympathy. When you've got things like ADHD or like I do, routine is really important. And when things start screwing with your routine, and it has a mental health impact, you'll be surprised how many professional athletes have got ADHD. They didn't do great in school, but they did very well at sport because they're being active and burning off that energy. And I don't know. Again, risky choices, and again, bad advice. That is again bad advice that a lot of these high-profile athletes are given. Really bad advice. Take advantage. There's a lot of people who hang around them, which of basically, I wouldn't say they're badly educated, but they didn't do well at school, and then they haven't really. I feel harsh saying this, but a lot of them haven't actually had to live in the real world. They've been talent scouted very, very young, and all they know is professional sport, and that's their routine, which does them really well. And this is where you see a lot of issues happen post-retirement, where they do struggle financially. They're not well advised. They're given a lot of money very young, and they don't know what to do. They're not advised properly and looked after properly. Their agents take advantage of them, and their advisors. I hate it when a professional, I think, has advisors. Like LeBron James is not actually that nice a bloke, apparently. Obviously, with what's going on in the NBA now and what's going on in Major League Baseball now, there's a thing you can't criticize LeBron James. Basically, his entourage basically threaten people who, be it in the media or other players or ex-players, you can't criticize LeBron. Going to end badly for you. Because either A, they can see the shit out of you because he's got all the money. But LeBron James apparently doesn't have friends. He really is a very isolated individual. And he's got a lot of hangers on and entourage. I don't like that when but this is the problem we have now. especially if the media like a potential like Reece Walsh. I think Reece Walsh is going to have a terrible fall when it all goes wrong. Um, well, Terry Jenkins, yeah, I've heard of Terry Jenkins. You know, Whitlock, the Australian darts player, met Whitlock, the Wizard of Oz. Is it Sean Whitlock, the Wizard of Oz, the darts player? Met him a few times. I met the late great Andy Fordham. There are again. Who was the one? He was the Count, and he got done for being a bit of a perv recently. Ted Hankey. Apparently, he was not very well liked on the tour when he was a player. You know the guy, I forget his name. He did the BDO commentary, and he had all the. His back basically broke when he was basically playing darts in an actual competition. Ted Hankey, yeah, he's not very well liked. I forget the guy the darts player who does a lot of the darts commentary when he was on the BBC, and he was actually in the middle of a competition tournament, and he felt a pain in his back, and he was throwing the dart, and he actually broke his spine. His spine collapsed. But no, Tony Eccles was the same as Hank. I've heard story about. Look, growing up, the BDO darts at Lakeside was religious viewing in the household, in the family. It was the done thing. In the early January, you watch the darts. February, you watch the Super Bowl. League Cup final, FA Cup final, all the European football finals. There were certain things that were religious. So the snooker, but it was more on my mum's bit of the first. So it was more. My mum was like, "This is I used to do the bins. Literally, one of my mates lives to the back entrance is actually in the middle of a housing estate, and one of the lads I used to work with lives 2 doors down from the back entrance where the late great Andy Fordham, when he had his heart attack, was back of the ambulance and down at Frimley Park when he was the Viking carried off stage when he was big. And of course, Andy Fordham has since passed away. But obviously, the BDO darts obviously has lost. I don't know if it's been absorbed now by the other darts organisation. I forget what it's called. Is it the PDO? Well, Andy Fordham. Yeah, bless him. Yeah, but apparently Andy Fordham was one of the more liked sporting characters. PDC. Now, Andy Fordham apparently was really well liked by others on the tour and was liked by the media. He would be more than happy to give interviews. He was very respectful apparently, and no one has a bad word to say about him apart from the fact he was morbidly obese and was a pisshead. But he was apparently a very, very, even when he was a professional darts player, he was still a publican. He still had his pub license. So when he wasn't, going around playing tournaments, he was running a pub. He was just an average bloke who had his own business, and but unfortunately, he wasn't the healthiest. But then he did the weight loss program, and he lost a lot of weight. He was one of the people who actually lost the most weight. I forget what the program was called, but he actually went on the weight loss program. I actually watched the whole thing from episode 1, and I watched these famous people going through the weight loss, and he was the one who lost the most weight as a percentage, and got healthy. But got healthier. I don't really follow the darts anymore, but Ted Hankey is Tony. I'm gonna have to look up what Tony Eccles, but Ted Hankey obviously went to prison, didn't he? But he pled guilty. He didn't try and deny that he did it. But I never you get that. I never liked Ted Hankey. He came across as a bit of a hang on. There's something about you here. He just looked evil. If that matters, he looked evil. I know, obviously, he was called the Count, and that was his, slick back hair, but I never liked him. So Tony Eccles. But no, I forget who the darts player was, and he did the BBC coverage, and he had all the bling. I forget his name; it's going to really annoy me. And he also did the fitness with Andy Fordham, and I forget his name. It's really going to Tony. Here we go, Tony Eccles. Let's see what they. So he's a former Oh yeah, the Viper. What did he? I've got to remember what he did now. Bobby George. Yeah, he sort of, you could tell he was dropping hints that he weren't overly happy with these in like Hankey and Eccles and a few other players. Because Bobby George, while he's a bit of a cockney geezer, and he had all the bling. Apparently he's a really nice bloke, and people have a lot of he has a lot of time for a lot. Um, BDO and PDC quarter final, Dutch Open, British Penta. Huh? Well, what did he get? So well, what happened to him then? Oh yeah, no, Tony Eck was completely different. So Ted Hankey. Wow, he was released on the 1st of July 2022 after 8 years out of 16. So he did half his sentence. Huh. He only did half his sentence. That's Ted Hankey. Let's see what's happening at Ted Hankey these days. Bobby George, yeah, I think, yeah, Bobby George is English highest form. He's back. Oh wow, he's 79. Wow. But yeah, he had a bad back. His back went. Yeah. Wow. That's mad. But he does not look 80, does he? I know he's a pisshead and a chain smoker, but he's a character. Um, Television presenter, former darts player. He's widely recognised as one of the game's biggest personalities, known for his the flamboyant entrances, King of Darts. Um, King of Bling, Bobby Dazzler, Mr. Glitter. I wouldn't call him Mr. Glitter. That's okay. Manor Park, yeah, he's probably got me in it. He's even designed his own set of darts as well, by the way. He's got his own darts line. 1976 he started. And he played between 77 at the BDO and 2009. But he never won the World Championship or World Masters, but he won the Essex Masters 3 times, Super League Singles once, Butlins Grandmasters twice, used the World Dart Championship twice, North American Open, Santa Monica, Europe Singles, and Europe Cup. Wow, he won a fair bit. Personal life. Here we go. Born in Manor Park. He was a nightclub bouncer. Not surprised with him being a nightclub bouncer. I'm not gonna floor lab builder, tunneler. He worked on the Victoria line before he took up darts. He was when the Victoria line was being built. He was working on that. Well, oh wow, his house has been like the layout of his house is a dartboard. So his house is circular. It's laid out like a dart. That's brilliant. No, as a dart. Sorry, so that's how his house is laid out. And his front door, the window is a stained glass top. You couldn't make that up. He's a king fisherman. His son Richie was a darts player, and he's also an ambassador for going around schools teaching maths. He's a skills ambassador. That's mad. Darts career took it up age of 30. Oh wow, he broke his back after beating Russell Stewart and Martin Phillips. He broke his back while celebrating winning a set during his quarterfinal match against Kevin Kenny in '94. He got through the match. Wow, he got to the final. And he competed in the final against Doctor's Advice wearing a steel corset. And of course, he loses the final. And he literally broke his back celebrating. So he jumps up and his back broke. That is mad. I knew he broke his back. But he had to have 8 titanium screws just so he can stand up. That's mad. That he celebrated his back broke. And that was 31 years ago he broke his back. That's mad. But no, he I can't believe he worked as a well, I can believe he worked as a nightclub bouncer. I was Ted Hankey. That's who I was looking for someone else. Well, he's an ex nightclub bouncer. So yeah, you know, you got Ted Hankey. That's the one. But that's the one. Yeah, Ted Hankey always looked like a little bit of a. I yeah, I was never a fan of Ted Hankey. I think that's more of a personality clash rather than they dislike each other because Phil Taylor has come out and pointed out he don't like certain. But you, wow, he's right. Oh, this is interesting. So Ted Hankey was declared bankrupt in 2018, and then after that, it all goes a bit to shit for him. He has three kids. He had a stroke in 2012. He was declared bankrupt 2018, and his wife is divorcing him. So there you go. And yeah, he went to Chester Crown Court, went to prison for 2 years. I think he's already out of prison now, but he pleaded guilty to all that. But no, I didn't realise Ted Hankey had a stroke in 2012. But yeah, no, there appears to be a few darts players who are a bit. Yeah. I also. I well, it shows how good he is as a player, and the fact. Well, I think that's bearing in mind he's born at the end just after the Second World War, and that means he's been brought up in a very tough environment. That can do attitude and don't give up, and I think that's part of the upbringing he's had. But I don't think he even realised he broke his back, and then obviously he's in a lot of pain. And but that's what hairline fractures and all that. Um, but again, look, two retired players. One's obviously been in commentary for a long time and has commentated and covered the game as a presenter and a commentator for a very, very long time following retirement. And the other's recently retired not that long ago, but left the BDO to the PDC. And I think that's where a bit of the dislike between the two comes is obviously the BDO's subsequently struggled as a competition and the PDC thrived as a competition. And you could argue that if Phil Taylor had stuck around the BDO for a bit longer, it might have also thrived. Yes, I remember Ray Stubbs. Everyone remembers. What actually happened to Ray Stubbs? He was a BBC sportsman for a very long time, and then he sort of disappeared. Because Ray Stubbs also did the match of the day, and did the darts, and he did some other. What happened to Ray? Yeah, I do. I am that old. Yes. Final score. Ray Stubbs did a lot of stuff for the BBC. What happened to him? You know, Ray Stubbs used to play for Tranmere Rovers. He worked for BBC, ESPN, and BT Sport. He now works for Talk. He work for Talk Sport? I haven't seen him on Talk Sport. I didn't realise he was an ex-player. But Ray Stubbs did actually, I think, was underrated. He's an English broadcaster, former football player. Played Tranmere. Yeah, he played. Wow. But the thing is, he didn't play for very long. It's very. He used to do the snooker and the dart. Right, let's have a look. So he began his Tranmere. Oh, he stayed as an admin guy, and then he became commercial director at Tranmere, and he was the reason why they got their first sponsorship deal. BBC. So we start with BBC Radio Merseyside, then he goes to BBC Manchester. Oh wow, he actually really did Grandstand, Matchday Sports Night, FIFA World Cup, the 1990 World Cup, Questions Sport, Euro 96, 98, Winter Olympics, Commonwealths, Match of the Day, Grandstands, 6065 Live, Football Focus, Match of the Day Live. He worked for BBC for 26 years. He covered football, darts, snooker, Football Focus from 99 to 2004. Wow. And then he covered BBC Red Button on Score, and then Final Score, BBC One. He covered all 10 of the major tournaments, so World Cups and Euros from 1990 till 2008. He was a stand-in presenter for Match of the Day and Match of the Day 2. He covered the darts, he covered the snooker with Hazel Irvine, and then he did Grandstand and Sports Night. He left the BBC, joined ESPN. Oh, well, I didn't realise this. On the Boxing Day game between Liverpool and Wolves in 2009, he was taken in at half-time and taken to hospital as a precaution. He presented ESPN's live coverage of the 2011, 2012 and 2013 FA Cup finals with pitch-side build-up and post-match coverage. Following ESPN being taken over by BT Sport, he was on BT Sport between 2013 and 2016, and then he joined TalkSport. And he joined TalkSport 2. And then he's covering between 2023 and 2024 the World Senior Darts Championship. So I don't know what he's doing now. TalkSport 2. Oh, so he's on the digital TalkSport 2. So that's all he's doing now. Oh, wow. I thought I hadn't seen him. Yeah, Ray Stubbs. I think he made a mistake leaving the BBC, really. But again, ESPN never really worked here in the UK. But then it became BT Sport, and it never made any money. But as I say, Ray Stubbs. I mean, God, I always wondered what happened to him, and now we know. and now we know. Hazel Irvine did a bit. She did a bit of the darts. She did a bit of snooker. Yeah, it's weird because Ray Stubbs obviously he sort of disappeared from, the. But yeah, I would say this. I mean, I think he made a massive mistake leaving the BBC. I think he should have stuck it with the BBC, maybe ITV. But then again, he did do a bit on Channel 5, so he was on free to air for a little bit. But then I do think he, moving to off the BBC. But again, ESPN were launching. They were offering more money than what the BBC were offering. Dougie Donnelly, I can't remember him. Oh God, now we are aging me now. Well, Scottish. I think he would have covered more of the Scottish football than some of the more Scottish events. I don't really remember Dougie Donnelly, but I probably have. I have some Scottish friends. They might. He doesn't really ring much of a bell. But Ray Stubbs, I have to admit, for someone, because a lot of people think football players are all thick and they are uneducated. But Dion Dublin's done quite well with his TV presenting. Ray Stubbs has obviously done quite well because he's worked for a number of broadcasters. He probably was But no, Ray Stubbs. I think 26 years working for the BBC. I think. I think with how much Gary Lineker, obviously, how much he got paid, I think the BBC just couldn't afford to keep him. Like Jake Humphrey going to BT Sport when it was around. They were You know, do I like? I thought. I don't think he was boring. I think he was very competent. He was very knowledgeable. Um, Obviously, professional football didn't work out for him, but he'd also, bearing in mind, he transitioned from a footballing stamp. And this is where I think we need to keep more ex-players in the various sports. I really do, because he obviously went into being a club administrator and negotiating um, sponsorship deals, which he did for Tranmere. I didn't know that. I honestly, until reading his bio, I didn't realise he was a former semi-pro football player, but football career didn't work out. So he goes into being a club administrator for Tranmere, and then going on from there to the media side of things and having a career change at a time in the 80s when that was, it was a different landscape back in the 80s, and there was a lot of uncertainty economically back then. But Jake Humphrey with Paul Radcliffe. I never really, I didn't. I think when Jake Humphrey starts to get on the BBC and then onto BT Sport, I think that's when the sports media started dumbing down. Not just the mainstream, but the media in general starts dumbing down. But the sports media started dumbing down to the audience, as if the audience is thick. You can definitely see a shift around the late 2000s, early 2010s, where the media basically dumbs down. And they talk down to the audience, and the quality of presenting goes down. Even though your Ray Stubbs and your Dion Dublins and your Gary Linekers, who are obviously ex and Gabby Logan's these are ex-athletes who know what they're talking about. Your Claire Buildings, she was an ex-eventer. Gabby Logan's an ex-gymnast, and the others are ex-football players. They always came across as quite knowledgeable what they're talking about. And then as time has gone on, I think as a general rule of thumb, not across the board, but as a general rule of thumb, not with every sports broadcast, but there is a certain element of dumbing it down. And now we've got to get not just the female presenter, but female pundits on a men's tournament, and vice versa. We got a male pundit. And I'm thinking to myself, there's an agenda here, and it's not that I love watching women's football. I love watching women's rugby league and women's rugby union, even women's ice hockey. I like watching the PWHL in North America. I think they've got a brilliant skill level, and the speed that they play the game at, it's fantastic. But I would say, and I say this as common sense, not that I'm because I grew up with Claire Building and Hazel Irvine and Gabby Logan and Sue Barker, on the TV. And there's a few others. Who's the swimmer? Who's the pissing swimmer? Who was the swimmer? And now she's been criticised for her views on trans athletes. But who's the swimmer? Oh, it's going to annoy me. And it's not Rebecca Adlington, because she's obviously got into broadcasting later on. But it's that's going to bug me now. Who is the swimmer? I've forgotten her name. And she was very, very good as a swimmer. And she used to do the coverage. And who's the male swimmer who came out as gay and he was on Strictly Come Dancing, and is it Foster? The men's swimmer Foster. Sharon Davis and Foster. Is it Steve Foster? They used to do at the Olympics and the World Championships and the Europeans. They used to do the swimming coverage for the BBC. Now Foster and Rebecca Adlington do the swimming coverage now, and Sharon Davis has sort of been shoved off to the side a little bit because some of her views are not politically correct. She's allowed her views on women's sport, and she was a very, very successful female athlete, and I think she's rightly concerned about. But now the IOC are meant to be meeting in Paris to discuss transgender participation in women's sport. I have concerns that female athletes A, have been put at risk, and B, that what for even before the 60s, a lot of female athletes and women in general have fought for in regards to equal rights in various things are being put at risk. Um, I know women who play ice hockey. I know women who've played football and rugby, and still play rugby now for some of the local clubs. And as their friend and as an ex-rugby player, I would not feel comfortable with a man, going into them and making a tackle. You just would do it, even though some of them would snap me in half because they're big front row and second row forwards, and they would hurt me. If I was to train week in, week out like I used to as a teenager and as in the early 20s, I'm pretty sure I would hurt them, even though they're front row forwards. There's a couple that I know that are, I'm pretty sure that I could probably hit harder than them, even though they're bigger than me. I wouldn't feel. I look. That being said, what we've seen in the collegiate NCAA debate over in the US, I think, has really, raised the subjects with the swimmer, and then I do think that common sense sort of got lost about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. For some reason, common sense went bye, and it's in a lot of things. I'm all for, equal rights. Yeah, that's the one. Look, I'm all for equal rights for everyone, regardless of background, religion, race, sexuality, etc., etc. And they're therefore no prejudice when it comes to a lot of things. But when it comes to, team sports and individual sports, especially like things like boxing, rugby, rugby union, rugby league, all that kind of stuff, Aussie rules, these collision sports. I mean, there's a safety aspect. It's pound for pound. If you got, let's say, boxing or kickboxing or MMA, and you are literally you're looking at them pound for pound, because there are weight divisions, and that is important in the martial arts. You've got the weight divisions. Pound for pound, they could both weigh 60, 70 kilo division. Let's just go with that. Like my kind of body weight. That bloke is going to kick or punch harder than that woman. Generally speaking, although you can get some women who really do train hard and yeah, they hurt. But this is what I mean. I mean, didn't it fracture her skull or something? There was one where there was it an MMA fight where the woman was left with brain damage because of the transgender athlete, and like literally could have died. I honestly, in my opinion, we need some common sense without obviously being nasty or hurtful to these people, and without demeaning, the issues that they obviously face in society. I think we need a bit of common sense. We go, hey, hang on, let's just. And I'm not going to go into some of the other scientific studies that say, which have been discussed, where cross-dressing is a sexual fetish. Yeah. I try and keep that obviously a bit more PG, but that's things have been proven. Cross-dressing, even women cross-dress as men, they get off on it. It's facts. That is seen as one of those fetishes, and I'm trying to stay PG here, but it's difficult, and it's a difficult subject, and there is. Who was the boxing promoter who was trans? There was a boxing promoter who was the boxing promoter. Very famous boxing promoter, and not Ray Warren, and it's not the Hearns. There's another boxing promoter, and he I can't remember his name now, but what's his name or her name, or what was his name? It's so difficult. Who was the boxing promoter? And he's still alive. and it's not Ray Warren, obviously, and it's not the Hearns, and it's another boxing promoter, and he's British, and he's really famous. And some of the fighters he's promoted, we're talking the Eubanks, the Bens, um, but this is where I think if the IOC and some other sporting governing bodies have said this is not happening anymore, we're oh, I forget the boxing promoter. Um, he went on Celebrity Big Brother, and this is going to really bug me now. Not that I actually watch Celebrity Big Brother because I have a brain. Don't watch any of that game show crap. What is the box? Anyway, there's a boxing promoter, and yeah, no. His name passes me, but he's British, and he promoted some of the biggest fighters in the 80s and 90s. Some real big names in boxing, both over here in the UK and across in America and rest of the world. He promoted some of the biggest names in boxing. Frank Warren. It's not Frank Warren. It's not the Hearns. It's someone else, and it's really, really gonna piss me off. I'm gonna have to have a. I'm sorry. I'm constantly looking at my pissing phone and looking at Wikipedia and Google search, but there were days when my brain just doesn't want to work, and there were days that is it Frank Malone? It could be. It's going to really bug me now, but there is a. Oh, guess what? You are right. You are right. It is. It is. He managed Lennox Lewis. That's it. Lennox Lewis. Ah, you are right. It is Frank Maloney. It just to me just that didn't ring a bell. But Lennox, yeah, it's Lennox Lewis's old promoter and old manager. Yeah, you were right. He's still, bearing in mind, still a boxing manager and promoter. Wow. He was also the first Briton, or she's got to call her Kelly Maloney now. Maloney was the first Briton to manage a British heavyweight champion in a century. Now I've got his profile up now. 72 years old, right? He's still active as a boxing promoter. And Celebrity Big Brother 2014. Boxing promotion, Irish Catholic. I mean, that's his background. Oh God. He was a boxing trainer as well. Wow, Maloney. Yeah, he did work with Frank Warren, or they worked with Frank Warren, and then in the 1980s they fell out, and Maloney then managed Lennox Lewis in '89 onwards. Oh, he's had 5 fighters to world titles. Rendell Munro was the boxing bin man, was his 5th success to defend the European Super Bantamweight, and he fought for 3 world titles, twice on interim basis, drawing one season away. Wow, he had a heart attack while watching his boxer John McDermott lose to Tyson Fury. And then he obviously found Darren Sutherland. Darren Sutherland. Darren Sutherland. Now, there was some contention around. Darren John Sutherland was an Irish boxer from Dublin, and he was an amateur. He was a 2008 bronze medalist at the Olympics, and he died in 2009. And Wow, he won, and as a professional, he won all 4 fights as a professional. On September the 14th, 2009, Sutherland was found dead by Maloney, his promoter, and it's alleged he died by hanging himself. He was depressed. And the gold medalist James DeGale commented on the death. It was very, very sad news. I just can't believe it. First one. But Maloney apparently, when it came to Darren Sutherland's passing, apparently he was not welcome at the funeral, but the wife and the mother is wife and mother at the time. The inquest was critical of Maloney, and apparently Sutherland, who's the professional boxer, was frightened of him. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. Very interesting, that. Other ventures. Celebrity Big Brother made £400,000 as the fee for appearing on Celebrity Brother. Celebrity MasterChef, and the 5-part documentary series was released in 2021 called Knockout Blonde. Oh wow! So Maloney was the UKIP candidate for the 2004 London Mayor election, and was accused of being similar to Nick Griffin with their racism. There you go. This is what's really interesting. So, obviously, transition from man to woman. They were criticised for comments about lesbian and gay people. Interesting. These included the explanation that a failure to campaign in Canada was because there were too many gods. So it's ironic. So they've done gender transition, yet they were homophobic back in the early 2000s. As they say, majority of homophobes are end up being gay or bisexual. It's really weird, that. Been married twice. Oh, so they've admitted to being a very violent domestic violence person. Like, yeah. So yeah. Former Frank Maloney, now known as Kelly Maloney, is a little bit of a nasty character. Battered at least one of his ex-wives, and one of his boxers who allegedly killed themselves was apparently terrified of him. So no, not particularly. Racist, a homophobe who's now gone through gendered reassignment, to transition from a man to a woman, beats one of his ex-wives, if not both of them, but publicly admitted to domestic violence, and one of his boxers took his own life, citing in the weeks prior to their suicide, "I'm scared of my promoter." He doesn't come across as a particularly nice individual, man or woman. Racist, homophobic, violent. Yeah, sounds like a lovely human being. Lovely human being. Look, reality TV. That's the thing. I knew there was a boxing promoter quite famous. And Frank Warren, he split from Frank Warren, doesn't like him. That tells you something. um, I just find it funny. I think there's a huge portion of those who are openly homophobic and such who end up being gay or bisexual. It's the studies have proved it, depending on what studies you look at. No, I'm not a massive fan of a lot of the boxing promoters. Not a fan of them at all. They're very, very similar to obviously player agents in regards to a lot of the team sports, but I'm not a massive fan of Frank Warren or the Hearn, either Hearn, to be honest. And there's a lot. I mean, Warren and Hearn, those two. I mean, they really dominate. They really dominate the boxing scene. But who was the king? The Black Geezer King, who was a Mike Tyson's old promoter. Is it Larry King? He famously killed someone. He shot someone, didn't he? He was accused of murder. I think he actually did time for murder. And I think his famous saying was, "This is one of the boxers." I think it was David Hay versus Valuev. Don King, that's it. And I think he was one of the people trying to drum up a lot of the interest in the US for the fight for the TV networks and all that. And I remember him saying this. He goes, "This is bigger than the Thriller in Manila. This is going to be bigger than the Rumble in the Jungle. This is oh, God save the Queen." And he was going off on one of his famous, "This is bigger than the Thriller," because obviously he was heavily involved with George Foreman and Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and that era of boxing. And then going on to Mike Tyson and some of the other fighters from the 80s and the 90s. And he's a very dodgy character, Don King. Very dodgy. I don't know if he's still alive. Oh, God, is Don King still alive? Back to the phone we go, Don King. But he was a big character. Is he still alive, Don King? I know there's been a lot of accusations about Don King and some of his conduct, and we're looking at a lot of dodgy characters today, aren't we? But this just shows that sport attracts these some of these not particularly pleasant individuals. Wow, 1931, lad. Sorry, lad. That's all I'm going to say to that, lad. But Don King is there's boxing has always had that nasty, sleazy element to it. I would say Tyson Fury. I wouldn't say he's not likable. I would say he's divisive. I think he's divisive. I don't think his dad and his brother help. I think his brother's his half brother, but I don't think his dad helps his cause. But Tyson Fury, some of his views are quite divisive. But then you've got to look at the community he's from and the background he's from and his the gypsy community and their views on marriage and women in the home and women with the family and women's rights. You have to look at that back is his family background. But Don King, he's from Cleveland, Ohio. He's been going since 1952. The Thriller in Manila, and the Rumble in the Jungle. The Rumble in the Jungle, the Thriller in Manila, Ali, Fraser, Foreman, Larry Holmes, Thomas Adamek, Roberto Duran, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Chris Bird, John Ruiz, Julio Cesar Chavez, Ricardo Mayorga, Golota, Hopkins, Trinidad, Roy Jones Jr., Nelson, McClellan, Antonio Barrera, Salvador Sanchez, Wilfred Benitez, Wilfredo Gomez, and Christy. I think Don King is probably promoted some of the greatest world champions of all time. However, he has been sued by many of the boxers he has promoted, have sued him for defrauding them. Mike Tyson was quoted as saying he did more bad to black fighters than any white promoter ever in the history of boxing. King has been charged with killing 2 people in incidents 13 years apart. At 54, he shot a man in the back after spotting him trying to rob one of his gambling houses, so he was involved in illegal gambling. and it was ruled justifiable homicide. Now, that's obviously American law. 67, he was convicted of second-degree murder for stomping on one of his employees to death because he was owed $600. With this, he served 3 years and 11 months because the conviction was reduced to voluntary manslaughter. He curb-stomped a guy to death. So basically, he's a piece of shit. When Mike Tyson, the most dangerous man in the world, comes out and said he did more bad to African American fighters than any white promoter has ever done, that tells you Don King is a piece of work. Right, so let's have a look at Don King. So early life, was born in Cleveland. Wow. Beginning in 1951, Don King ran illegal bookmaking out of a record store on Kingsman Road, earning the byname The Kid, as well as the nicknames Kingpin and the Numbers Czar. During this time, he was charged with killing 2 men in incidents 13 years apart. He fatally shot Hillary Brown in the back. He and 2 accomplices were trying to rob Don King's gambling houses on East 1 to 123rd Street in Cleveland. And that was classed as justifiable homicide, even though he was running a bookmaking operation and a legal gambling den. Didn't go to prison for that. Just shows money, bit of bribery there. April 20th, 1966, he killed an employee, 34-year-old Sam Garrett, in an open street in front of several witnesses over $600 in debt. He beat and kicked Garrett and held a .357 Magnum revolver to his head. Garrett never regained consciousness and died of severe head trauma 4 days later. He claimed self-defense, with the prosecution, supported by witness, including that of the arresting police officer, Bob Ton, argued that Garrett was attacked by King, with Garrett's last words being quoted as, "Don, I'll pay you the money." He was convicted of second-degree murder in 67 for the killing. He was sentenced between 1 and 20 years. So that's how they did it at the time. While he served his term at the Marion Correctional Institution. And then he got out after 3 years and 11 months on a reduced involuntary manslaughter. His attorney on appeal. He was pardoned in 1983 by the Ohio Governor Jim Rhodes, with letters from Jesse Jackson, Coretta Scott King, George. So basically, some very high-profile civil rights people came out in support of him, even though he basically killed 2 people. He entered the boxing world after persuading Muhammad Ali to box at a charity exhibition for a local hospital in Cleveland. And he also partnered up with Don Elbwam, who is an American Jewish promoter who had already had a stable of boxers in Cleveland. And then he negotiated to promote a heavyweight championship between Ali and Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle. King, there was many rivals, but King was able to secure it for a $10 million purse through the government of Zaire. He arranged the 75 fight between Ali and Chuck Wepner. And that's where Sylvester Stallone writes Rocky. And then he promoted the 3rd fight between Ali and Fraser in Manila, the Thriller in Manila. Apart from promoting heavyweight fights in the 70s, he was also busy expanding his boxing empire. Throughout the decade, he compiled an impressive roster of fighters, most of them in the Hall of Fame: Larry Holmes, Wilfred Benitez, Robert Duran, Salvador Sanchez, Wilfredo Gomez, and Alexius Arguello would all fight under him in the 70s. Mike Tyson, Holyfield, Cesar Chavez, Aaron Pryor, Bernard Hopkins, Ricardo Lopez, Felix Trinidad, Terry Norris, Carlos Zarate, Azumar Nelson, Andrew Galotta, Mike McCullum, Gerald McLean, Meldrick Taylor, Marco Antonio Barrera, Tomasz Adamek, who was Polish, John Ruiz, and Ricardo Mayorga were all of the boxers who chose King to promote them. He was a constant promoter for the Jacksons Victory Tour in 1984, where he nicked money, by the way. He purchased a Cleveland-based weekly newspaper called The Call and the Post. And as of 2011, he was his publisher. The Gaming Hall of Fame 2008. He was a financier of Major League Wrestling. And he was in talks with another boxing promoter from Canada called Dan Otter from Canada to have a WBC Cruiserweight World title bout sometime. His wife died in 2010. Lawsuits and prosecutions. He has been investigated for links to organised crime. In 1957, the porch of his house was bombed. Yes, he was. Oh God, imagine being his wife. Yeah. And in October the same year, that was in May. In the October, he was shot in the head and neck with a shotgun by an unidentified gunman, reportedly due to his refusal to pay $200 in protection money to a crime boss called Shondell Burns. In December of that year, he was raided by the IRS for tax evasion for, at the time, $32,029, which is equivalent to 2024 of $358,513 in today's money. Charges of blackmail were dropped in 1958 when King declined to testify. During a 1992 Senate investigation, King invoked the Fifth Amendment when questioned about his connection to the late, great John Gotti, the Italian-American mobster who was, I think John Gotti might still be alive, but the FBI were after him. The then IBF president, Robert W. Lee Sr., was indicted for racketeering in 1999. King was not indicted, nor did he testify, though prosecutors reportedly called him an unindicted co-conspirator who was the principal beneficiary of Lee's machinations. So he made money out of organised crime. Brilliant. He's been involved with many fraud litigation cases. So Muhammad Ali sued him in 1982 for underpaying $1.1 million for the fight with Larry Holmes. Then, as a subsequent, King called in an old friend of Muhammad Ali, Jeremiah Shabazz, and handed him a suitcase containing 50 grand in cash and a letter ending which ended Muhammad Ali's lawsuit against Don King. He asked Shabazz to visit Ali, who was then in the hospital due to failing health, to get him to sign the letter and give Ali the 50 grand. Ali signed it. The letter gave King the right to promote any future Ali fights. According to Shabazz, Muhammad Ali was ailing by then and mumbling a lot. I guess he needed the money. Shabazz later regretted helping King. Muhammad Ali's lawyer cried when he learned that Ali had ended the lawsuit without telling him. Larry Holmes also alleged that over the course of his career, Don King cheated out of $10 million in the fight purses, including claiming 25% of his purses as a hidden manager. Holmes says he only received $150,000 out of a contract of $500,000 for his fight with Ken Norton, and $50,000 of his $200,000 for facing Ernie Shivers, and claims King cut the purses for his bouts with Muhammad Ali, Randall Tex Cobb, and Leon Spinks, underpaying him $2,700,000 and $250,000 respectively. He then sued. Larry Holmes then sued King over the accounting and auditing for the Jerry Cooney fight, charging that he was underpaid $2 to $3 million. He then sued. Don King for $300,000 being taken out of the fighter's purse for his fight against Mike Tyson. He settled for $150,000 and also signed a legal agreement pledging not to give any more negative information about King to reporters. So he basically took the money and was told to be quiet. Tim Weatherspoon on the fight was threatened with being blackballed if he did not sign exclusive contracts with King and his stepson Carl, not permitted to have his own lawyer present. He signed 4 contracts of servitude. One was an exclusive promotional contract with Don King and other ones. So they basically alleged to have taken 33 and 50% of the fight purses away from him. The 4th contract was completely blank. Other examples were Weatherspoon being promised money for fights and only receiving a fraction of them. And that Don King was in breach of the Nevada boxing regulators' rules and the WBC sanctioning. There's all sorts. Oh God, there's loads. Greg Page, when he fought Greg Page, only got fought. Oh my God. Mike Tyson described Don King as his former promoters as a ruthless, deplorable, and greedy. Bearing in mind, Mike Tyson has been declared bankrupt on more than one occasion. In 1998, Mike Tyson sued Don King for $100 million, alleging that the boxing promoter had cheated him out of millions over more than a decade. The lawsuit was later settled, with Mike Tyson receiving $14 million in damages. Terry Norris has come out suing him, alleging that King had stolen money from him and conspired with his manager to underpay him for fights. The case went to trial, but King settled out of court for $7.5 million in 2003. King also said, "Yeah, I'll make the settlement public." Wow, here we go. Don King himself sued Walt Disney over an ESPN document, Sports Century documentaries. 2.5 billion lawsuit. Because it alleged that Don King had not only killed once but twice, but also threatened to break Larry Holmes's legs. Cheated Meldrick Taylor out of $1 million, and then threatened to have a Meldrick Taylor. Oh my god! So he basically sued them for it because it showed him in a bad light. But then Lennox Lewis sued him in 2003, claiming that Don King used threats to pull Mike Tyson away from a rematch with Lennox Lewis. And then Chris Bird sued Don King for a breach of contract, and they settled out of court under the condition that Chris Bird would be released from his contract with Don King. So basically, he's a bit of a crook. How he's even still allowed to be a boxing promoter is beyond me. And then this, again, poses questions over the integrity of boxing as a sport. Just putting it out there, the Nevada Gaming Commission said he broke the rules. I could go into every single lawsuit, but we'll be here all bloody day if I was doing every single Don King lawsuit. But he's been facing lawsuits since the 70s, 80s. I mean, we're going back 40, nearly 50 years when it comes to the boxing side, of things. And he's ripped his fighters off. He makes the Hearns and Frank Warren look like saints. He makes Maloney look like a saint. He makes some of these other modern day promoters look like nice blokes. He's been sued by every fighter he's ever promoted. It makes me wonder why boxers would sign up to have him as a promoter and as an agent. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you wonder why any fighter would sign with him as a promoter. Because from the looks of it, he's robbing them blind. Shit. But then the fact that Don King is linked to John Gotti tells you all you need to know about the state of boxing. When the most famous boxing promoter there is, and probably one of the most crooked boxers, is linked to John Gotti, the Godfather. Once one of the most dangerous and wanted men in the US. If people like Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson's no saver, if people like Mike Tyson are saying that he's done more damage to boxing as a black boxing promoter than any white promoter has, it just tells you what you need. Well, Stephen Lee, look, he got banned for 10 years from snooker. And I think he got done by the courts as well. I think he actually got done for match fixing via the legal system. I think he got a suspended prison sentence. The fact that he's still trying to peddle that one. I can't. I mean, Mark King, obviously got a 5-year ban. Stuart Bingham breached betting rules. The one that gets me is Higgins and Maguire. Those two, they don't like it when you bring it up, even though John Higgins admitted taking bribes. He never admitted to throwing games, but he admitted to taking backhanders. And he doesn't like being reminded of the fact that when you took bribes and you admitted to it, you took dirty money. Snooker's got a big problem. And Stephen Lee, I think, got lucky with the 10-year ban because now there's players who are now doing life bans. Well, look at what's happening right now in the NBA and Major League Baseball with indictments, actual indictments from the federal government in the US. We've got high-profile NBA players and coaches, and we've got, an up-and-coming Major League Baseball pitcher and a well-established Major League Baseball pitcher who are indicted. And obviously, if John Higgins was found guilty of match fixing, I mean, he admitted to take the bribes. I think the damage, it's like if Stephen Hendry was accused of, or some of the former world champions of the past. Snooker is a sport that is very open to match fixing. And you look at the players now currently being investigated, suspended, banned. I think Mark King was this is a big name player. Stephen Lee, big name player. These are players that have been top 10 in the world. And the allegations against Maguire and Higgins don't go away. They've never gone away. They've been there for a good while now. And yeah, it's not a good look for the sport's reputation. And of course, with what's going on with the gambling sponsorship and how when tournaments are played here and when the adverts and the sponsorship, does that mean potentially we see more tournaments go over to the US because of the change on the broadcasting in regards to the TV broadcasting and the sponsorship and how they've got to reduce their reliance on the gambling companies? It's an interesting one. And again, you look at the end of tobacco sponsorship and snooker, much like Formula One and World Superbikes and MotoGP and in fact motorsport in general, was heavily reliant on the tobacco and alcohol sponsorship. Now, alcohol sponsorship still exists, but the tobacco sponsorship's obviously gone now. And the gambling companies filled that void as quickly as possible. It's legal. It's regulated. Yes, it's a legal industry. And when the tobacco sponsorship got banned and the tobacco sponsorship ended and there was an agreement globally to end it, the gambling companies filled that void where other industries, other companies, other sponsors could have and potentially should have. They just did. At the time the tobacco sponsorship ended, we had at that point, what happens? The financial crash. And one of the few industries to make money over the last 20 years and make huge amounts of money is legalized gambling and the gambling industry. And unfortunately, the last 20 years, the global economies, depending on the industry, have struggled. And yet, one of the few industries to consistently grow, make money, and make big profits, legalize gambling. And they filled the void. I mean, in regards to the tobacco sponsorship, if the agreement was to come earlier or later, potentially, that means the gambling companies don't get that way in. And other companies establish themselves as major title sponsors. But then at the same time, we still have the financial crash. We have the mortgage issues, the banking issues. So the financial institutions, the financial companies struggle. And so, yeah, but the gambling companies filled the void. They took advantage. And look, that's their right. They signed these agreements. These sports are looking for income now that the tobacco companies and to a certain extent, not everywhere, but to a certain extent, a lot of alcohol companies, not all. There's still a fair few alcohol firms that do sponsor sport, but it seems to have changed. But it's not every sport will gambling sponsorship, but most sports have at least one gambling sponsor somewhere on a team or on a billboard somewhere. Motorsport seems to be less impacted than other sports. But even in motorsport, we are starting to see the occasional betting company and gambling brand and poker company sort of make their way in. Not as title sponsors, more like minority sponsors, but they're sort of making their way in now. But it does seem to me that the betting companies don't really seem to have the same relationship with motorsport that they do with other sports. But they filled the void. They took advantage of a gap in the market, and it's definitely the end of tobacco sponsorship. A couple of years after the financial crash and gambling advertising and sponsorship kicking off, and as I say, one of the few industries to make money consistently year on year over the last 2 decades. And they've got the money, they've got the profits, they've got the extra money, and they've got the customer base, sports fans. So it's in we go. This is more than just online poker and the horses. We are getting in there. We are increasing the gambling lines on football, on rugby, on all the sports. And we're going to sponsor as many sports teams. We're going to get our advertising hoardings on as many, stadiums as possible, and we're going to get as many TV and internet ads as possible, ads in newspapers as possible. We're going to fill as much advertising space as possible because the tobacco companies aren't allowed to advertise anymore. Because actually, to be fair, there was a period when vapes were allowed and vape companies were allowed, and there's a few that still, because they're classed as helping people quit smoking and a healthier alternative. There's a grey area there, but the gambling companies, in we go. And it's going to be, yes, newspapers are on the decline, but a lot of the newspapers have gone to online now as well with an online option. And some of them are free, some you have to pay for. And that's where they get a lot more of their revenue from in regards to the ad revenue. But the media is changing. The media is changing. A lot of the newspapers now have YouTube channels, for example. And again, they get that revenue from YouTube with the advertisers and YouTube Premium. I haven't picked up a newspaper in a long time. Even the free ones like the Metro, and you got like was it City AM or London Light? There was a couple of free newspapers in and around London. Evening Standard. I haven't picked a newspaper up for donkeys. Absolute donkeys. I haven't read a newspaper properly. Not that I. I mean, it's weird because I did media studies as an A level, and yeah, so I did media studies as an A level, and politics, and that was a key part of it. Oh, it's very interesting. Very interesting. It was very interesting to learn how TV dramas and TV programs, especially around crime, are like we've got The Sopranos and we've got The Shield and Chicago PD and Miami Vice. And I'm using the ones from America, but they were very popular over here on the TV as well. How they are constructed and Law and Order and things like that. And even over here, we obviously had The Bill, we had Spooks, we had Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes. We had comedies like the Thin Blue Line, which again is crime. It's crime. It's obviously crime and policing, even though it's a sitcom. And very interesting. And again, the social themes, product placement, advertising. It was very interesting to learn about it. Do I watch TV? Not now. I haven't for a long time. I used to, but not. The only things I watch on TV now is live sports broadcast. So when I go around my mum's, I will put the cricket on, the rugby on, the rugby league, the football. If I can, I'll find a live sports event and motorsport. And I'll mostly if it's Christmas Day, Boxing Day, I'll watch the first day's play of the Boxing Day test. So this year will be the Ashes. In previous years, it was England, South Africa, or England. I will watch the play on Boxing Day. That's what I used to do. But other than that, no, I don't watch TV. Don't watch TV. I don't even watch a lot of film anymore, really. I haven't watched a film in a while. So this year, because Boxing Day is on a Friday, there's only one Boxing Day fixture in the top flight this year in England or Scotland. There's none in Scotland. There's one in England. Most of the games have been played on the Saturday, the 27th. Boxing Day falls on a Friday this year, and that really, they're claiming it's because of the European club calendar. Not buying that, because the Champions League format was exactly the same last year as it is this season. So I'm not buying the Premier League and the SPL's excuses for, the reason why we've only got the one Boxing Day fixture in the English or Scottish top flight this year is because of the European club formats and pressures on. Not buying that, because they've scrapped replays in the cup competitions. The World Cup takes place at the same time of the year as the FIFA Club World Cup that took place this season. Similar size tournament. Not buying it. Not buying the excuses. It's because Boxing Day is on Friday, and the Premier League knows, much like the TV companies, that Friday night games don't draw. Friday games in general don't draw. More likely to have empty seats on a Friday than a Saturday. But look, honestly, for me, when it came to Boxing Day sport, it would probably be the cricket test match that I would watch personally. The ice hockey locally, the local ice hockey it's not really a thing. They shut down. What I find interesting is the ice hockey leagues around the world, when it comes to Christmas week, New Year's, they don't play. They actually have, that's their winter break. Same with the NHL. They have a week off over Christmas. Of course, you've got the All-Star break, or what is now the Olympics, and whether we continue to have an All-Star weekend for the NHL going forward is another thing. But you had the Four Nations last year, you got the Olympics this year. They're planning a World Cup of hockey as well. Well, you would think ice hockey would play. No, they actually look after. They allow their players a lot of time with their families over the Christmas festive period. That's always been a traditional thing in ice hockey. For some reason, it was only until, I think it was it until, what year was it, 62 or 66? It was in the 60s. Up until the mid-60s, they played on Christmas Day. It's only been since the 60s that we've had the traditional Boxing Day football. Until the mid-60s, you had the Christmas Day games. Matches were played on Christmas Day, and they expected the players to not spend time with their family and play on Christmas Day. The Boxing Day fixture, or fixtures, came about in the 60s when, I think it was when Jimmy Hill argued for increasing the upper limit on wages, so getting rid of the upper wage cap for players of what they could earn a week. And the PFA, which is Jimmy Hill, I think it was when Jimmy Hill quit as Coventry City manager and got involved with the PFA and basically battled for players' rights, that the Christmas Day fixture got dropped by the Football League and it became the Boxing Day fixture. I think Jimmy Hill was instrumental in that as well. And I think a lot of players were arguing for it, but they didn't really have a very strong union. Then Jimmy Hill decided, actually, no, we need a strong PFA. We need a strong League Managers Association as well. and Jimmy Hill really was the catalyst for. Okay, we could argue, getting rid of the upper wage limit for players for what they could earn a week. You could argue there were some unintended consequences that came about 30 years later in the 90s. But if it wasn't for Jimmy Hill, players would be earning a lot less and would have to have a second job, which a lot of them did in the 50s and 60s. And then Jimmy Hill went, no, this is not right. Their careers are short, or can be short, because Brian Clough and Sir Alf Ramsey had very short careers, and then they went on to be great managers. Especially Brian Clough, retired very young because of a bad injury. And he rightly argued that players should be better compensated. And there were some unintended consequences for that, because obviously a lot of clubs did struggle financially in the 70s and 80s, which ultimately did lead to the Premier League's foundation. And then the Sky TV money comes in and the situation changes again. But also economically, things weren't going great in the country at the time. Well, even across Europe in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of economic struggles across Europe at the time. But Jimmy Hill, I think, had good intentions when he went in to fight for the players. It just ultimately, the consequences post 92, and even during the 70s and 80s, where clubs were struggling to pay players, and Boxing Day dart. I mean, look, I think the NBA used to have Christmas Day NBA games as well. I think Jimmy Hill had good intentions when he went in to fight for the players in the Players Association, the Professional Footballers Association. I think he did a lot of good, but then obviously things have evolved since he was actually actively involved in fighting for players' rights. But many sports, in the 50s and 60s, a lot of players and coaches were actually, we need to stand up for ourselves. The owners are ripping us off and not compensating us correctly, and we're seen as commodities. We see it in the NHL. We see it obviously now in the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball with the Players Association. And they come about in the 50s and 60s as well. And the relationship between the players and the teams and the owners has never been great since these players' unions were set up. We saw it in the NRL a couple of years ago when they were threatening to strike over the CBA, and and we see it in. Look at Major League Baseball; they're going into a lockout in the next 12 months. We know they are, and now with what's happening with these gambling allegations and indictments of players, it's going to be interesting. Look, Jimmy Hill, really argued for a lot. And I think Jimmy Hill, if it wasn't for Jimmy Hill, the modern game would look significantly different than what it does today. Significantly different. Substitutions would be different. The 3-point system would be different. The players would still have an upper cap that was linked to inflation on their earnings. And they weren't earning a lot back in the 60s when he was arguing for, we've got to get rid of this wage cap on each individual, what an individual player can earn. It wasn't a true salary cap, as in the same way that we would see a salary cap in North American sports. But players, you hit that limit, you can't get paid any more per week. And this is the era of George Best and Bobby Charlton. They were capped at what they could earn. And Jimmy Hill went into bat for them. And fair play. I think the 2-point, 3-point system, it wouldn't. The teams would still be in the same position. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you've got a 2-point system for a win or a 3-point system for a win. Studies have proven that even with the NHL's point scoring system, with 2 points for a win, 1 point for an overtime loss, the 3-point game, if you were to bring back draws and get rid of overtime, so 1 point for a draw, no points for a loss in over, it doesn't overly impact the final table. Who makes the postseason? It doesn't actually change anything because you're still winning, so it doesn't really change much at all. 2 points on the 3 doesn't change a lot because you still got to win your games. So if you're drawing those games instead of winning them, it doesn't change much. The final table would still be very similar. Just the points totals teams earn would be less. That's it. That's it. Honestly. So the Football League and the Premier League, if it was a 2-point system rather than a 3-point system, it just means that, okay, you've got one less points differential for a win, but ultimately the league table would still look exactly the same as it does now, pretty much. It doesn't change anything. The final table would still be exactly the same for wins and losses and draws. Still be exactly the same. It's just you'll get a less points total at the end of the season. Yeah, I think it might work a little. It's an interesting one, but again, Jimmy Hill argued, and when he did that, look at all the other leagues around the world; they followed suit. English and British football, the UK used to lead the way in a lot of things. Now it doesn't lead the way. We weren't leading the way in VAR or goal line tech. Although there were calls for it, we weren't one of the first leagues to implement VAR. We weren't a world leader in that. And when it comes to rugby union, the law variations seem to be Southern Hemisphere driven rather than Northern. Seem to be, although the Six Nations is going to have some experimentation over some of the new card rules that they've got going. But Jimmy Hill really was a trail. I think he's instrumental. We've got to look at. I've got to do a video on Jimmy Hill and how he changed and how he had an impact on changing football. Because he really does have an impact on the modern game that I think people, and he was instrumental in making sure players were better compensated and player contracts were more player favourable than club favourable. And you can argue at the time was the right decision, and there were some unintended consequences 30 years later when the Premier League comes along, and then in the mid to late 90s the money explodes. Whereas in the early seasons of the Premier League, the money didn't blow up until about the late 90s, early 2000s. And then the money explodes when your David Beckhams and your the David Beckhams of the world and the Roy Keanes and the Vieiras. And then suddenly when David Beckham starts having the big money and Jermichael Owens and all that, and then suddenly the big name overseas players start coming to the Premier League in bigger and bigger numbers and for bigger and bigger money. It was around the 2000s that the wages really went out of control. But again, how could Jimmy Hill, when he was arguing for what he was arguing for in the 60s, in the late 60s, have been aware of what was going to happen in the 90s and the 2000s, 30 years later? Yeah. Yeah, you could draw your. I mean, Italy did that in '82, didn't they? Italy did that in '82. They did not win a single group game, and then in the knockout stages, they came to life. So they were very boring in the group stages, didn't do much, and then went on to win the '82 World Cup. So yes. Anyway, look, it's 20 to 9. I've got an early start for work tomorrow morning. A lot of things discussed. I've got to do a review of the Rugby League Ashes, so that'll be a video to keep your eyes peeled for. Although I think I'm busy tomorrow evening. And keep your eyes peeled for future content. I've got to do a video reviewing the Rugby League Ashes and my thoughts on where England are at and where Australia are at and the state of international rugby league. And then we'll see what happens with Payne Haas and Ryan Pappenhausen and Roger Tuivasa-Sheck and R360. Yes, a lot of dubious. A lot of characters who've damaged their respective sports and caused a lot of controversy and a lot of negative publicity. And I think that's something that professional sport, unfortunately, is a lot of bad characters and very damaging. Although I think, think about it, you're going to get bad eggs in any walk of life, in any industry. But unfortunately, some of them were very, very high profile. And the Don King, for example, I mean, I am surprised he's had that many lawsuits and he's still allowed to be a boxing promoter. I know he's 95, I know he's getting on now, and he's still allowed to be a boxing promoter, even with the fact that he's even broken the law, being convicted of 2 murders, two, even though one of them was a justifiable homicide. I can't, how he got away with running an illegal gambling operation is beyond me. Didn't go to prison for that. It's absolutely beyond me. How he only served 3 years in prison for a second murder is beyond me. But when you've got connections in the right place, it is. Don, I mean, God. And then he sued a TV company for doing a 5-part because it made him look bad. And I think your criminal record makes you look bad, but then he gets a pardon from. Oh, it's just mad. Mad how Don King is personally not on death row, but yeah. Don King's a character, and boxing. Don King is links to John Gotti. I mean, that's just mad. Oh, but he looked rugged. Don King is. Yeah, it is what it is. But sport, much like Hollywood and the music industry and TV, and there's some shady people around entertainment. It's always been the case. Where there's money to be made and celebrity, there's going to be some. And we've seen it in TV, in Hollywood, and in film, and in the media. Seen it there. We've seen it in other in a lot of sports. And now with the gambling investigation and the potential, match fixing on spot fixing and betting allegations we're now seeing in the major leagues in the US, there's always. I'm surprised it's taken this long with legalized gambling in the US outside of Nevada and Atlantic City for a betting scandal. I'm surprised. What, a band called ABC? Have I? I've heard of a band called Alphabet who weren't very good, but ABC. No, should I have? Not that I listen to a lot of music these days from new bands, but God, what have they done? What did they do? There's got to be some kind of sleaze if you mention this. Consider, right, hang on. Let's have a look. Let's see what comes up with. What did ABC do? Oh, nothing. Oh God. Oh, that's very new pop and sophisticated. What the hell? Oh, the new era, kind of new wave stuff from the 80s. So synth pop band, 80s band. What? Let's have a let's have a look. They were formed in 1980, and they were used to be called Vice Versa. Shoot that poison arrow to the heart. Oh, ABC then. Shoot that poison arrow. Do, do, do. Shoot that poison arrow to the heart. Oh, yeah, no, my mum had them on vinyl. I know they are. I know who they are now. Shoot that poison arrow. I know who they are. Shoot that poison arrow to the heart. Shoot that poison arrow. Oh, yeah, my mum had them on vinyl. Oh, I remember them now. The second British. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember them. Synth pop. Yeah, they were similar to. They're from the same part of the world as Human League. Right. I can't. I know. Yeah. Yeah, I think my mum had them on vinyl. My mum had a lot of my mum actually used to collect vinyl, and we had a lot of vinyl. Anyway, I'm gonna go to bed now because I have to be up at like 3:30 in the morning for work. So thank you very much. A lot of stuff talked about. Um, Always an interesting conversation. And yeah, there's a to-do list. Obviously, got to do a video on my review of the rugby league Ashes. I wasn't really not happy with how England performed. They just I tried to be positive in the match reviews, and the second test they did play better, but there was that period at the beginning of the second half and the third test where you're thinking, they come on, they can do something here, and then it all just fell apart. But I do think Sean Wayne needs to go as England coach. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you all very soon.